Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. POV. I finally returned home to see my family. I had missed them in the week I had been in Alaska, hating myself for nearly killing someone. But I was back now, determined to not let the call of Bella Swan's blood undermine my resolve. I was sure she was a devil sent to tempt the monster within me. I came in through my open bedroom window and quickly crossed the room, eager to greet my family. I paused, my hand on the knob of my unopened door, as I was suddenly hit with the combination of the torturous scent that had seen me nearly kill Bella last week and the sound of beautiful, unfamiliar laughter coming from Alice's room. I focused on Alice's thoughts, and my confusion suddenly turned to fury as I realized that it was indeed Bella Swan who was in the house, laughing with Alice, and of all people, Rose. I snarled softly, "How dare they invite my own personal demon into the house?" I thought angrily. But as I continued to watch through Alice's eyes, my anger quickly turned to shock and astonishment. Bella was laughing, her head thrown back and her beautiful brown eyes sparkling as she helped Rose and Alice place clothes and shoes in Alice's enormous wardrobe. I suddenly realized that Alice and Rose had gone shopping with Bella this weekend, and my eyes widened in surprise. While Alice would, in all likelihood, go shopping with anyone, Rosalie going shopping with a human was astounding, especially as it was the very one I had wanted to kill. As I puzzled over their behavior, I realized that I couldn't hate Bella. It wasn't her fault that her blood called to me. I sighed, realizing I was still standing by my door. I released the doorknob and settled down to eavesdrop. I wasn't going to leave this room while Bella was in the house and take the chance that I might attack her, so I was stuck here until she left. Alice already knew I was back, but the others didn't. Welcome back, Edward. She thought at me, pleased. I continued watching them as they moved to the spare room, next to mine, where 5 suitcases were already piled in the middle of the room. They began to unpack them, placing armload after armload of clothes into the closet. I sat there confused. Why would Alice or Rose be putting clothes into this wardrobe? Couldn't they fit their stuff in their own wardrobes anymore? My thoughts were soon answered, though, when Bella turned to Alice. "Thanks for letting me keep all this stuff here, Alice," she said, indicating the wardrobe, now filled with enough clothes and shoes to rival Esme, though certainly not enough to rival Rose or Alice yet. "I think Charlie would have a fit if I came home with all of this." She chuckled, and Rose and Alice joined her. "I hadn't seen my sisters enjoy themselves this much in a long time. Besides, I'd never been able to fit it all in my room, let alone my little closet," she continued. A thought suddenly occurred to her, and she grinned. "What with you guys letting me keep my stuff in the spare room, my car in the garage, and my harp and enders, I almost feel like I'm moving in." Alice's thoughts became happy and speculative. She'd make such a wonderful new sister. I wonder, before her thoughts cut abruptly off with the lyrics to the never-ending song. "You're welcome, Bella. You may as well consider the spare room yours, anyway. We almost never have guests," she explained. Downstairs, I could hear Esme silently planning to redecorate the room for Bella, in case Alice and Rose ever invited her to stay the night. I was shocked and confused. Alice wanted a human as a sister. Even more surprising was that the rest of the family members also quite liked the thought of Bella moving in. Even Carlisle, who I gathered from his thoughts had only just met her, was already getting attached. Jasper had no thoughts of killing Bella at all, and was happy to have Bella around because she made Alice happy. Emmett found Bella incredibly entertaining, and I laughed as I saw from his thoughts how clumsy she was. What surprised me most, though, was to hear Rose's thoughts. Rose had always been the most protective of everyone in the family, and I never thought I would see the day when she would voluntarily interact with a human, let alone actually like them. Bella seemed to have made my family happier, and the only sadness I could find in their thoughts was that, on some level, they were all missing me. I silently mused, continuing in my thoughts as the rest of Bella's words sunk in. Why would she need to keep her car and a harp here? Surely Rose would never let Bella's decrepit old truck stay in our garage. Why would it need to anyway? And what was that about a harp? I had read enough teenage minds over the years to know that there was no way someone as beautiful and popular as Bella would play a harp. It would be considered nerdy, and people who wanted to fit in and be popular at school picked cool instruments like guitars. I was soon proven wrong in my assumptions by Esme, who had joined the girls in what was now Bella's room. "Bella, your harp arrived yesterday. I put it next to the Edwards piano, she informed her. It's beautiful, she commented. In Esme's mind, I saw a large harp now resting next to my piano downstairs, and a replay of the conversation that had led to Esme offering to keep it here for Bella. Once again, I was astonished, and I found myself frustrated that I couldn't read her mind. She never seemed to do anything expected. She appeared to be completely comfortable in a house full of vampires. When her instinct should have told her to run, she didn't do what normal things a teenage girl would do. I found myself pleasantly surprised. She not only played an instrument, but many, and she composed as well. Everything about her was intriguing, and I found that I had a sudden desire to talk to her. I quickly dismissed the thought as I hesitantly took a small breath and felt my throat erupt into flames. It was tolerable because of the distance between us and the fact that I had just gorged myself on blood, but it was still incredibly painful. I sighed. The one human I find that is actually interesting, and I can't read her mind, I thought. My interest spiked as I heard Bella. I would love to play something for you, Esme, she offered. Esme was delighted, and she quickly accepted the offer and led Bella downstairs, the others following. Emmett and Jasper paused the video game they were playing and turned towards the harp. Carlisle appeared from his office and settled on the couch next to Esme, as Bella sat at her harp and began, her fingers lovingly plucking the strings. I listened entranced as I soon recognized the song she was playing as one of my favorites, Clair de Lune by Debussy. I softly hummed along, and I was delighted when it came to a finish, and instead of stopping, she immediately moved on to another Debussy piece, Arabesque. She paused for a moment after Arabesque came to a halt and explained the next song. This next piece is one I composed for my Aunt Di, who taught me to play and founded my love of music. She began playing a beautiful melody, full of happiness and fun. I relaxed on my couch and let the music flow through me, awestruck by her talent. Unsurprisingly, my family's thoughts mirrored my own as they complimented her on her performance. After Bella had shyly received their compliments, she exchanged a mischievous glance with Rose, who nodded and quickly disappeared, returning with 3 large stacks of photos, which she casually tossed onto the coffee table in front of Emmett and Jasper. I looked through their eyes, curious to see what was in the photographs. Emmett and Jasper's thoughts turned petulant as they focused on the photos, while Alice and Rose's turned gleeful. There was picture after picture of Rose, Alice, and Bella shopping, ice skating, and playing on roller coasters and water slides. You tricked us, Emmett accused, rounding on the girls. You knew there was an amusement park there, and you didn't tell us, he complained. They laughed at him. We didn't see you guys volunteering to come with us, Alice retaliated. They looked slightly ashamed of themselves. Emmett, we should have known something was up when they didn't try and get us to come with them and hold their bags. Jasper muttered wryly as they continued to look through the pictures. Behind them, Esme and Carlisle laughed at them. I couldn't help but chuckle softly as I observed the pictures through their eyes. All 3 girls looked unbelievably beautiful and were glowing with excitement and happiness. Bella was perhaps the only human I had ever seen that could match a pair of vampires for beauty. The girls all continued laughing at Emmett and Jasper and teasing them before they finally promised that next time they went to that particular mall, the guys could come. I found myself hoping that the invite included me. To further mollify Emmett and Jasper, they then produced some of the latest video games and handed them over, Bella explaining that 2 of her European cousins had recommended them. Emmett jumped up and thanked them all enthusiastically, hugging all 3 separately. I was surprised when Bella didn't wince at the strength of his hug. Emmett wasn't used to hugging humans, and he had squeezed her as hard as he had done to Rose and Alice, but she had given no sign of being in pain. I shrugged it off, figuring that perhaps he had tempered down all of his hugs. Bella left soon after, Rose and Alice taking her back home as it was now Sunday evening and Bella hadn't been home since Friday evening. She took with her a few shopping bags, less than 1/8 of the stuff she had actually purchased, the rest safely ensconced in what was now her closet in the spare room. I waited until they were gone before heading downstairs, my throat burning as Bella's fresh scent hit me. I swallowed back the venom, surprised that it was getting easier to ignore her scent and embrace Esme, who had come running towards me. Welcome back, she murmured softly. It's good to have you home, son. It's good to be back, I said softly before moving out of her embrace to give Carlisle a nod and fist bump Emmett and Jasper. I settled down next to them and took my first look at the photos with my own eyes, flicking through them and noting how much all three girls appeared to have enjoyed their long shopping trip, and how at ease Bella looked with my vampire sisters. I could tell from Emmett and Jasper's thoughts that they were still upset that they hadn't been able to go, and I couldn't miss a chance to tease them. The one time you two don't go shopping with your wives, and there's an amusement park in the mall. I laughed at them. Shut up, Eddie. Emmett grumbled. Don't call me Eddie. I growled, and Emmett laughed. So what's the deal with Bella? I asked, changing the subject. Dude, you wouldn't believe her. She has absolutely no fear of us. I even gave her a menacing grin that usually makes humans run away, and she just laughed at me. Emmett complained, slightly put out that she wasn't scared by him. She's completely comfortable around us, Jasper added. Not 1 ounce of fear. I furrowed my brows, confused as they told me and showed me with their thoughts all of their interactions with Bella since I had left. I was amazed that she had just walked up to their table at lunch, though I completely understood her need to get away from Jessica, having been subjected to her thoughts for a while now. I laughed when they showed me their shock when Bella had hijacked them and sped at over 200 km all the way to Port Angeles, and I was incredibly impressed when I found that she had a Maserati GTS arriving that would be staying in our garage so that her father wouldn't know about her obsession with fast cars. I was relieved to note that it wouldn't be her old truck staying in the garage like I'd first thought. Most surprising, though, was that I found myself inwardly growling at the idea of that foul Mike Newton touching her, and I had no idea why. It wasn't like she was my possession. I calmed myself with the thought that I just didn't like Newton. It had nothing to do with Bella, a girl I barely knew. All in all, Bella was becoming a person of extreme interest to me. She had a love of fast cars and music, with her taste in both similar to my own, and I found myself eager for the next day to come so that I would be able to see her, and hopefully talk to her. As I mused over this, I realized that I had gotten somewhat used to breathing in Bella's scent, which was all over the house, and that I had been ignoring the burn in my throat for quite a while as I engrossed myself in Emmett and Jasper's description of Bella. I just hoped that it would be as easy to ignore her scent tomorrow at school. I was keen to meet the little human that had enchanted my family. EPOV. I came downstairs the next morning, finding myself both apprehensive and eager to get to school and officially meet Bella. When Rose and Alice had gotten home last night, they had filled in the blanks on the shopping trip with Bella, and I had been shocked to learn that ever-vigilant Alice had slipped up and nearly revealed her ability to see the future. Apparently, they had both been so comfortable around her that she probably could have walked them out into the sun and they wouldn't have noticed. I had frowned at that and warned them to be more careful. Much to Alice's annoyance, we had all gotten a hearty laugh out of the special photo Rose had produced. It showed Bella and Alice pouting at each other, identical sad puppy dog looks on their faces as they both tried to get their own way. When Rose told the accompanying story, Jasper fell off the lounge in shock, incredulous that anyone had been able to turn Alice's pout against her. Emmett and I were impressed. We'd never been able to turn down Alice's pout. I was still apprehensive about resisting Bella's scent, but I had secretly borrowed one of Bella's shirts and tried to get myself used to her scent in preparation, so I was relatively confident that I would be able to resist. I hated to think of the consequences if I did slip up. Not only would I hate myself, but because my whole family was now attached to her, they would probably hate me too. I was not willing to let that happen if I could help it. The rest of my family soon joined me downstairs, and we jumped into the Volvo and headed to school. We arrived in time to see Bella exiting her truck, and I smoothly slid the Volvo into the space next to hers. We exited, with Rose and Alice rushing immediately over to Bella. Emmett, Jasper, and I followed them at a more sedate pace. As Bella turned and spotted me, I felt Jasper register the change in her feelings. She had been completely comfortable before, but now she was feeling slightly worried and sympathetic. I frowned. I would love to know what she was thinking about me. That would make her feel sorry for me. After the way I had acted last week, I had expected her to be incredibly scared of me. I certainly wasn't expecting her to be worried about me. This was definitely not a normal human reaction. She should be running away from me, screaming, or at the very least, cowering. Instead, she simply gave me a beautiful smile, with her eyes lit up, her cheeks flushed from the cold, and her glorious mahogany hair framing her face. She looked sensational, and I felt my breathing stop for a second. Jasper quirked an eyebrow at me. "What's gotten into you?" I snapped out of it and collected myself and returned her smile with one of my own. We all heard her heart stutter as she blushed a deep red, and I felt venom pooling in my mouth at the sight. I swallowed it back, finding that I had indeed become somewhat desensitized to her scent. Extending my hand to her, I spoke softly. "Hello, Bella. I'm Edward. I'm sorry I didn't get to meet you last week, but I was out of town for personal reasons." I was surprised when she reached for my hand with no hesitation. We simultaneously gasped as our hands connected, and a spark ran between them. I looked down at our connected hands, confused. I had never felt that before. My siblings were no help. Jasper's thoughts were smug, but he was deliberately thinking about the Civil War. Emmett and Rosalie obviously hadn't noticed anything, and Alice was singing the tune of a Britney Spears song in her mind. I looked up at Bella, who had a perplexed look on her face and was also staring out our joined hands. It was obvious that she had felt it too. I suddenly realized from the thoughts of the other students that we had been standing there for a couple of minutes, and I released her hand, puzzled that I felt a twinge of regret and an urge to pick her hand back up. I could hear Jasper laughing at me in his thoughts, carefully keeping them hidden from me. Bella seemed to collect herself once I had let her go, and her smile returned as she looked up at me. "It's nice to finally meet you. Your siblings have told me a lot about you." I frowned at that, turning to look suspiciously at my siblings, who were all trying to look innocent, though amusement was breaking out over their faces. "What have they told you?" I asked guardedly. Her face broke out in laughter. "Nothing, actually. They barely mentioned you, but Rose said you'd react like this if I told you they had said something." My siblings were now barely breathing as they laughed at me. "Not funny," I growled at them, causing them to laugh harder. I glared at them until the bell went and we had to go to class. I walked to class frowning, my siblings still laughing at me in their minds. I noted proudly that I had managed to resist Bella's blood. In fact, though my throat still burned, I found that it was becoming much more tolerable. At lunch, I entered the cafeteria, got a tray of food to use as a prop, and sat down at our normal table. I was the first to arrive and was soon joined by the rest of my family. Bella entered the cafeteria soon after, moving quickly through the line before grabbing a square of some sort of food, which she quickly unwrapped and placed into her pocket. Across from me, Alice started vibrating with excitement, and I frowned when she kept her thoughts blocked. I watched as Bella confidently approached us, not an ounce of fear in her demeanor, and inwardly winced as the jealous thoughts of Mike hit me. Bella soon sat down beside me, and I hesitantly smiled at her. She smiled back and opened her mouth to speak when Emmett interrupted her. "Bella, no buffet outfit today?" He guffawed, his mind going back to an incident last week when Bella had ended up wearing 2 trays of food due to her clumsiness. Instead of turning red with embarrassment like I thought she would, she quickly reached into her pocket, dived across the table, and slammed her square of food in his mouth, smearing it over his face. Emmett shut up quickly, his face screwing up in disgust as he spit out what I now recognized as chocolate cake. The rest of us watched him, laughing at him. Emmett, you look absolutely delicious." Bella choked out between laughs. Emmett glared. "I will get you back, Bella." "Bella," he threatened. Bella turned serious. "This is the kind of thing that happens when you mess with me, Emmett," she warned, her face and tone threatening. My eyes widened as Emmett cowered slightly. "If you try to make me embarrassed again, I will quite happily hurt you," she growled. We all chuckled under our breath at the thought of petite human Bella hurting super strong human Emmett. Who knew a human could be so scary? Emmett muttered under his breath at us, and I had to agree with him. This human was so strange. She acted more like a vampire than a human. From Jasper, I could see that Bella was feeling quite smug about getting even with Emmett, and I had to admit that I was more than impressed. She couldn't have picked a better way of getting back at Emmett if she had known that we were vampires who were repulsed by food. I stopped at that thought, silently wondering if she could know what we were. Surely she must have noticed something different about us by now, with all the time she had spent with my family, but I soon dismissed that idea. If she did know what we were, she would have run away, screaming. Even if she usually reacted differently to most humans, it was impossible for her to not run away in fear and disgust if she knew what kind of monsters we were. My musings were interrupted by Bella, who had recovered from her laughter at Emmett's expense and had settled back in her seat, grabbing my bagel off my tray and taking a big bite. As she chewed, I looked at her in shock, registering that my siblings hadn't thought anything of her strange behavior, as Rose and Alice chatted with Bella and Emmett and Jasper argued over a video game. Jasper noticed my shock and looked over from his conversation with Emmett. He smirked at me as he noticed Bella happily chewing on my bagel It's kind of funny to see your food steal your food, isn't it? He asked. I nodded slightly and continued to watch in confusion as Bella ate half of my bagel before putting it back down on my tray. She picked up Rose's fruit salad next, eating roughly half of it before moving on to Jasper's bag of chips. He had already opened it, and she grabbed a handful. The others didn't even comment on her stealing their food props, seeming used to it, and I surmised that it was a daily occurrence for her to eat off all their trays. When she reached for Emmett's tray, he quickly grabbed it and held it protectively to him. Bella, he teased. I'm a growing boy and I need my food, he stated, his eyes dancing with amusement. Bella laughed, then composed her expression. Her face turned into a pout, the same one we had seen in the photo of her with Alice. But Emmy, I'm starving, she whined, her eyes suddenly glistening with tears that threatened to fall. I watched awestruck as Emmett took one look at her expression and hurriedly thrust his tray towards her, not even commenting on the fact that she had called him Emmy, something he hated. Bella smiled triumphantly, her tears disappearing as she picked up a slice of pizza and took a large bite. She moaned in contentment. Emmett, you always manage to pick the best food, she complimented him. He smiled proudly, and I felt a fleeting sense of jealousy. Jasper looked over at me in surprise. I shook myself out of it, wondering why I was jealous that Emmett had been able to pick more appealing food. Last of all, she swiped Alice's chocolate pudding, scarfing it down as she looked at the clock and realized that the bell was going soon. Her phone vibrated, and after she checked the ID, she jumped up, apologizing as she rushed out of the cafeteria. I listened hard and could only make out faint words of her conversation. Yes, Heidi. I know. Yeah, I went shopping without you. It was a blast. Don't worry. I'll be fine. Talk to you later. She soon came back. Cousin from Europe, she explained. She wanted to hear about our shopping trip. BPOV. I skipped out of the cafeteria beside Edward as we headed for biology, feeling pretty proud of myself for getting even with Emmett. Shoving food into unsuspecting vampires' faces had been a favorite trick of mine against Felix and Dimitri for years. I continued down the hall and into the classroom, secretly impressed by how well Edward was handling my scent, especially with how close he had been to me. We sat down at our biology table, and I listened as Mr. Banner described the lab we would be doing today. I sighed as I realized it was something Sulpicia had had me do when I was 7. Ladies first, Edward offered, turning towards me. I found myself lost in his golden eyes for a few moments before I collected myself, blushing furiously as I took a quick peek at the first slide through the microscope. Proof A's, I said confidently. May I? He asked. I shrugged and pushed it towards him, inwardly seething that he felt the need to check my answers. Stupid know-all vampire. He checked it and, seeing that it was correct, wrote it down. We took turns with the rest of the slides, and were finished in less than 10 minutes. Everyone else had barely started. We stared at each other. I was still slightly annoyed that he had initially doubted my knowledge. So I decided to aggravate him a little, knowing that he would probably feel frustrated by not being able to read my mind. Did you get contacts? I asked suddenly, taking him off guard. No, he answered, looking puzzled. Oh, I was sure your eyes were black last time I saw you, and now they're gold, I said, observing his eyes closely. Realization dawned in his eyes before he shrugged and turned towards Mr. Banner, who was making his way to our table. Edward, didn't you think Isabella deserved a chance with the microscope? He asked, checking our answers. Bella, Edward corrected, and she identified 3 of the 5. He informed Mr. Banner. Mr. Banner's eyebrows shot up. Have you done this before? I nodded. I was in advanced classes in Phoenix, I explained. No need to mention my incredibly intelligent vampire family. I guess it's good that you two are partners then, he muttered, before moving away. We sat in silence for a moment before Edward cut in. It's a pity about the rain, isn't it? I turned to him in surprise. He was asking me about the weather. No doubt he was referring to the fact that it had been snowing before lunch, while it was now raining, thwarting any plans others may have had for a snowball fight. The snow had been the reason I had been late to lunch, going out of my way to avoid the snowballs that had been flying around. No, not really, I muttered. You don't like the cold? He asked. I shook my head. Not really, I answered honestly. Then why did you move to Forks? He asked curiously. I thought about it, complicated. I finished lamely, hoping he would leave it at that. He didn't. I think I can keep up, he argued. I sighed. I figured I might as well go with what was mostly the truth anyways. My mom remarried. I sighed. And you don't like the guy? He asked. If I wasn't nervous about where these questions were leading, I would have laughed at him. It was obvious that it wasn't often that Edward had to rely on talking to people to get the answers he wanted. It was obvious that he was aggravated by the fact that he couldn't read my mind. "No, it feels fine," I assured Edward, but he moves around a lot because he's a minor league baseball player, and I knew my mom wanted to be able to go with him instead of having to stay with me. So I decided and come to Forks and spend some time with my dad. I explained quickly. "Now both of my parents are happy," I concluded. He frowned, and I could tell he knew that I was editing my story. I inwardly cursed myself for being such a poor liar, while I could tell when someone else, even a vampire, was lying with no trouble at all. I had always been a terrible liar myself. "And are you happy too?" he asked. I shrugged. "It doesn't really matter. Life isn't meant to be fair," I informed him. He smiled. "I know what you mean," he muttered. "Besides," I continued, "I'm not unhappy here. Your family has been very welcoming," I said, gratefully smiling back at him. He opened his mouth to answer when someone at the next desk banged their book down on their desk, creating a draft that ruffled my hair, blowing my scent directly into his open mouth. He tensed, and I hurriedly turned away, cloaking myself in a shield and pretending to listen to Mr. Menor, who was now back in front of the board, talking. I watched Edward out of the corner of my eye for the rest of the lesson, feeling sorry for him and well aware that he was in pain. Thankfully, the lesson soon ended, and Edward rushed out of the class. I made my way out slowly and headed to Gym Grown. After a relatively successful gym lesson where I didn't injure myself or anyone else, I bid goodbye to Rose and Alice, waved to Jasper, Edward, and Emmett, who were on waiting in the Volvo, and headed home. BTOV. I spent most of that evening trying to distract myself from thinking about Edward's mesmerizing golden eyes, silently berating myself for being more than a little obsessed with him. Now that I had actually talked to him, I found that along with being the most handsome vampire I had ever seen, he was also interesting to talk to. In a pointless effort to rid myself from thoughts of Edward, I immersed myself in a new medical journal that Sulpicia had recently sent, hoping that the medical terms would keep my overactive thoughts at bay. Eventually I gave up, and after a call to Heidi, describing the great shopping trip I had gone on and teasing her about being jealous, I went to bed. Even in my dreams, Edward featured his golden eyes bright and his gorgeous smile directed at me. Eventually I woke up and prepared myself for another day of high school. I found myself eagerly anticipating the day, then berating myself because, if I was being honest, the reason I was looking forward to it was Edward Cullen. I stepped outside and found, much to my disgust, that there was snow and ice everywhere. Making sure no one was around, I wrapped myself in a shield and lifted myself into the air, hovering a couple of inches above the ground. Moving my shield with my mind, I was soon standing next to my truck door, having successfully managed to avoid slipping on the ice. I drove to school slower than usual, worried about my truck's capabilities on ice, but I was pleasantly surprised by how well it handled the conditions. With my slow driving, though, I was a little later than usual, and my usual parking place was already taken, so I found a place 4 cars down from Edward's Volvo to park in. I got out and waved to the Cullens before a metallic glint caught my eye, and I slid around on the ice, holding onto the tray of my truck as I made my way to the back of it and surveyed my tires. I realized that Charlie must have put snow chains on it this morning. I stood there silently overwhelmed as I thought about how thoughtful and caring Charlie had been. I was interrupted from my thoughts as I heard 2 things simultaneously. The first was a loud screeching. The second was the voice of Edward Cullen yelling, "No." I looked up in shock. My eyes, used to watching vampires move at fast paces, took in what happened next as I stood still in shock. Tyler's van was coming towards me at an alarming pace, and I knew I didn't have time to move. I instinctively threw my shield around me and braced myself, looking over at Edward's horrified expression. I was shocked when he threw himself towards me and knocked me to the ground, my shielded head hitting the asphalt as his hand shot out protectively in front of me, stopping the van. Simultaneously, my shield pushed itself out of its own accord, shrouding Edward and pushing the van slightly away from us. As the van settled, I instantly withdrew my shield from Edward, astonished that I had instinctively felt the need to keep Edward, an extremely strong vampire, safe. I was horrified that I had nearly given myself away in front of Edward, and relieved that he would probably think he had pushed the van away. I was startled when I saw Edward's worried face turn towards me, and I suddenly noticed that I was cradled protectively in his arms, my body humming in contentment, "Bella, "Are you okay?" he asked anxiously as his eyes ran over my body, searching for injuries. I smiled weakly at him, still shocked by what had just happened. "I'm fine, Edward," I assured him. Then I inwardly grimaced as I realized that I was going to have to play the innocent little human who had never seen anyone super strong or super fast before, if I wanted the Cullens to believe I was a regular human. Rue had stressed the other day that the Cullens needed to remain oblivious for as long as possible, especially about my gift and connections to the Volturi. It wasn't safe for me to be around them if another vampire or coven found out that I knew about vampires and decided to enforce the Volturi laws by trying to kill me and punish the Cullens for associating with me. Of course, I was confident that I could protect them if I was near, but I wouldn't be able to do that without revealing that I was the Volturi princess. I inwardly sighed, putting on a shocked expression. I looked up at Edward. "How did you get over to me so fast?" I demanded. His eyes tightened slightly, but he kept his face calm. "What are you talking about, Bella? I was standing right beside you, and I pulled you out of the way," he lied convincingly. I was impressed with his ability to lie, but I was angry that he had thought he could get away with implying that I was unobservant. "No, you were standing over by your car," I stated firmly. His voice hardened. "You don't know what you're talking about, Bella. You hit your head." I glared at him. "I'm fine," I said frostily. His expression turned desperate. "Please, Bella," he said softly. "Why?" I demanded. Just trust me," he said. I huffed. "Fine, but you owe me an explanation." I knew that he was worried that he had just exposed his family, but for some reason I wanted him to be able to tell me the truth, and I wanted him to feel that he could trust me to keep their secret. Edward was stopped from retaliating by the EMT's arrival. We sat back and waited as they moved the van away from us. I sat there, still comfortably wrapped in Edward's arms, and tried not to be impatient. Both Edward and I could have easily moved the van. I even contemplated subtly helping, but dismissed the idea. There was no way I was going to chance revealing my gift for a second time. When the paramedics finally reached us, Edward released me from his arms, and I felt a sense of loss as the traitor informed them that I had hit my head, but assured them that he was fine. I glared at him as they put me on a stretcher and, much to my embarrassment, strapped a neck brace on me. As I sat in the ambulance, I noticed a dent in the tan car beside my truck, which was obviously from Edward's shoulder. I knew I couldn't allow any of the other humans to get suspicious about the Cullens, so I subtly sent a shield over to the dent and quietly rearranged it, thankful that everyone was preoccupied getting Tyler out of the van. It would have looked very strange to anyone watching the dent to see it miraculously change shape out of thin air. To top it off, Charlie soon arrived, his panicked face desperate as he looked for me. When he finally found me, his face relaxed slightly, obviously noticing that I wasn't seriously injured. After multiple assurances that I was fine, the ambulance finally took me to the Forks Hospital. Edward came along too, but he got to sit in the front, and when we reached the hospital, he simply glided in by himself, promising the paramedics that he would have his father check him out. I snorted softly at that. Obviously, Dr. Cullen didn't need to worry about Edward's health. After a range of x-rays and examinations, I was finally left at peace, having dumped the stupid neck brace the first moment I was alone. Unfortunately, my peace didn't last long as Tyler was wheeled in next to me, looking horrible and covered in bandages. When he saw me, he looked apologetic. "Bella, I'm so sorry," he exclaimed. "I'm fine, Tyler, you didn't hit me," I assured him. Thank God. For a moment there, I thought you were going to die. I chuckled at that. It would take much more than a van to kill me. "How'd you get out of the way so fast?" he asked. Edward was standing next to me. I lied smoothly. Humans seemed to buy my lies better than vampires. He pulled me out of the way. I finished. "Oh, I didn't see him there," Tyler said. I paused, hoping he'd buy it. "I guess it all happened so fast." "Geez, I should apologize to him too," he groaned. "I nearly killed both of you." I gave him a small smile. "We're both fine. Tyler, stop worrying." Unluckily, Tyler felt the need to keep apologizing, so I lay back and pretended to sleep. He kept mumbling his apologies, but at least he dropped his voice. As I lay there, I analyzed what had happened this morning. I was completely puzzled by Edward's actions. He shouldn't have tried to save me at all. First of all, he barely knew me and shouldn't have any reason to save me. Secondly, he had just revealed that he wasn't human, which would have had terrible consequences if I hadn't been the human in question. Thirdly, at the speed that Tyler's van was moving, he had had little time to react. It seemed that he had saved me instinctively, which was strange because he shouldn't have any reason to react like that. I just couldn't understand why he had saved me. I was slightly angry that he had nearly revealed his existence to an entire school, which would have had disastrous consequences for both the vampire world and the humans who saw something. However, I was more than a little grateful too. If he hadn't saved me, I would have had a very hard time explaining why there was a dent in the shape of a human in Tyler's van, and why I wasn't dead. Or even worse, if I had pushed out my shield and sent Tyler's van flying away from me, I wouldn't have even had a chance to lie before I was chucked into an examination room. So all in all, it was very lucky that Edward had been there. I was interrupted from my puzzling thoughts by a familiar velvet voice. "Is she sleeping?" he asked. I opened my eyes to see Edward standing near the foot of my bed. Tyler stopped his pathetic rambling. "Oh, hey, Edward. I'm so sorry, man. I could have killed you." I smirked a little at that, and Edward chuckled softly. "No blood, no foul," he replied. I snorted softly. Edward turned to me curiously, and I quickly composed my face. "How are you?" he inquired. "I'm fine." I informed him confidently. I knew my shield had protected me. "But they won't let me go until a doctor sees me," I grumbled. He grinned crookedly at me, and I felt my heart stutter. Inwardly, I chastised myself for reacting like that. I had never met anyone that had that kind of effect on me. "Don't worry, I'm come to spring you," he assured me. As if on cue, a handsome blonde vampire entered the room. I smiled at Carlisle. "Hi, Doc," I greeted him. "I knew you missed having me over, so I thought I'd come visit," I joked. He smiled back, though. There was some slight uneasiness in his eyes. No doubt he had been informed about Edward's superhuman exhibition. "Bella, you know you're welcome at our house any time. You don't have to go to such extreme lengths to see me," he retaliated. We both chuckled as he looked over my chart and completed the forms. Edward said, "You hit your head. How is it feeling?" he asked, his fingers gently probing my skull for any signs of bruising. "It's fine. It wasn't that hard," I assured him. "I barely felt it," which was true. Thanks to my shield, I hadn't felt it. "Well, in that case, you're good to go home. I think your father's out in the waiting room," he informed me. I mentally winced at the idea of Charlie trying to take care of me for the day. "Can I go back to school?" I asked desperately. "I think you should take today off," Carlisle said firmly. "Does he get to go back to school?" I asked rebelliously, indicating Edward. Edward smiled smugly at me. "Someone has to share the good news that we survive." "Actually, I think most of the school's in the waiting room," Carlisle corrected. I groaned. Seeing this, Carlisle offered, "Would you like to stay a bit longer?" No, I said quickly, hopping hastily off the bed. I stumbled a bit as I landed, and Edward was suddenly next to me, catching me in his comforting arms. I looked up surprised and found that he seems as shocked by his actions as I was. I hesitantly looked over at Tyler and sighed with relief as I noticed that he had rolled over on his side and was facing away from us, luckily missing Edward's exhibition of speed. I reluctantly stood myself up properly, and Edward let his arms drop to his sides. Carlisle looked on curiously, his golden eyes missing nothing. "Well, I'm sure I'll see you soon, Bella," Carlisle said, "hopefully outside of the hospital next time." He grinned before moving over to Tyler. I turned immediately to Edward. "You owe me an explanation," I reminded him, whispering softly so that Tyler wouldn't overhear. I knew he was unlikely to tell me the truth, but I was curious as to whether he would try to lie to me or just try to brush it off. He immediately turned and led me out of the room and down a hallway until we were alone. Then he faced me, his expression cold and hard. "I saved your life. I don't owe you anything," he said harshly, in an obvious attempt to scare me and stop me from asking questions. Unfortunately for him, I was completely unafraid of him, and I glared right back. "Look," I hissed at him. For some reason, it bothered me that he didn't trust me with his secret. Although rationally, I knew he didn't know me well enough and shouldn't tell me. "If you're worried about me telling anyone, you can relax. I have no intentions of saying anything," I growled. His eyes widened slightly, and a surprised look flashed across his face before his cold facade was back up again. "Then why does it matter?" he demanded. "I just want to know, for me, I want to know why I'm lying for you," I explained. Technically, I already knew, but I wanted him to tell me himself. "Can't you just thank me and get over it?" he demanded. "Thank you," I said gratefully. If he hadn't saved me, my gift probably would have been revealed. His eyes searched mine silently for a few moments before he sighed. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" he asked. I shook my head, determination in my eyes. "Well then, I hope you enjoy disappointment, he warned, before turning and walking quickly away. Why did you even bother? I asked angrily at his back. He paused. I don't know, he whispered softly, and continued to walk away. I sighed in momentary defeat as I turned and headed back to the waiting room. As Carlisle had predicted, most of the junior grade was crammed in there. I quickly grabbed Charlie and dragged him out of there, trying to avoid as many questions as possible. I knew the other Cullens wouldn't be there. It wasn't really safe for vampires to come into a hospital, where there were so many open wounds, unless they had impeccable control. In fact, I was impressed that Edward had easily been able to ignore the scent of blood from Tyler's open wounds. Thankfully, when we got home, Charlie had to go to the police station, so I buried myself in my magazines and books, trying to forget my puzzled thoughts. Eventually, Charlie came home, and we had a quiet dinner before I went up to bed.
That night, I slept with a shield wrapped around me, fully aware that by Volturi law, I was supposed to be killed by the Cullens. Of course, as the Volturi princess, I was technically exempt, but they didn't know that.
I could only hope that the Cullens would decide that they wouldn't kill me. I didn't think they would, because they obviously didn't like killing humans, and I got along well with them. Of course, if they did decide to kill me, my gift would quickly be revealed, and I would be forced to tell them everything, and employ my rank as Volturi princess to keep them quiet, which would probably mean a visit from Volterra for my guards. I didn't get much sleep that night, anticipation keeping me awake, and when I woke up the next morning after only a few hours sleep, to find that I had had no vampire visitors in the night, I was relieved. I hurriedly got ready for school. When I arrived at school, as I suspected, the Cullens acted differently. Edward ignored me, treating me as though there was a glass wall between us, and after his vague nod in reply to my "Good morning, Edward," I let him be. I was slightly hurt that he felt the need to ignore me, but I understood to an extent. He was trying to separate me from the vampire world, and I wished I could tell him that his efforts were pointless. I was already far more prominent in his world than he realized. The others also acted different, but they didn't ignore me. Alice was even friendlier than normal. If that's even possible, I remembered that she saw visions of the future, and probably knew we were still going to be friends, and that I wouldn't tell anyone their secret. Jasper was wary, but I knew he was just being protective of Alice, so I didn't let it bother me. Rose was still friendly, although she was a bit more reserved and cautious. Emmett, of course, was... well, Emmett, he didn't seem to be bothered at all, and was the same as always, his boisterous attitude lifting the others slightly. At lunch, Rose finally asked cautiously, "So are you sure you're all right, Bella?" I smiled at her. "I'm fine, Rose. Not even a scratch on me. I'm lucky Edward was there to pull me out of the way." The others looked at me, slightly surprised that I was lying to them as well, before Alice answered, "Yes, we'd all hate to think of what would have happened if he wasn't there," she assured me. I grinned slightly and subtly changed the subject. I have to admit, though, that I'm a little annoyed that my truck wasn't badly damaged. I groaned. It would have been the perfect opportunity to get a new car. They chuckled at me. "Don't worry, Bella. You can always keep praying that a tree will fall on it," Emmett reminded me. I looked up to see his speculative expression and wondered whether he might anonymously push a tree onto my truck if I parked under one. I hoped so. It bothered me more than I'd like to admit that Edward was ignoring me, and I could only hope that it wouldn't last long. When I got home, I decided it was time for a call to Volterra. No doubt they would be interested in this development. I sighed, wondering why I couldn't have found a normal school with no vampires in attendance for my final years of high school. But then I realized that I wouldn't have wanted that anyway. Things were much more interesting with the Cullens around, especially Edward. Knowing Charlie wouldn't be home for a couple of hours, I speed-dialed Volterra. When they picked up, I had Uncle Arrow call all of them together to explain the car crash incident and my confusion as to why Edward had instinctively saved me. Caius was worried about exposure, but he soon calmed down when I assured him that I was the only one to see anything. They all talked quickly, their voices too quiet for me to hear over the phone, before Uncle Arrow came back to me. "Bella, we think it would be best if you told them soon that you know about vampires." I drew a quick breath in surprise. "But of course, don't tell them about your gift, or that the vampires you know are us," he continued quickly. "Obviously, they are going to be confused if you keep acting like you don't know anything when it's obvious you do, especially with how comfortable you are with them. So it's best if you just say you ran into a few vampires in Europe when you were 4. Just omit our names and the fact that you were in Italy," he reminded me. "Okay," I agree. "If you do end up having to reveal your gift or your connection to us, we'd rather you bring them to Volterra, where we can explain things to them properly." Uncle Caius added. I agreed and was surprised when Uncle Marcus spoke up next. "Bella, I know you're confused about Edward's reasons behind his instinct to save you, and I doubt he fully understands the reasons behind his actions yet either. But you know my gift is seeing relationships, so I have quite a lot of experience in this area. And from what you described, it sounds as though Edward reacted that way to keep his mate safe. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, mate, I asked, confused. Yes, you, he informed me. You think I'm Edward's mate, and that's why he saved me? I clarified. Exactly. None of the other vampires there reacted like that, and they probably wouldn't have been fast enough to save you even if they had, because they would have had to make a conscious decision. Edward acted on instinct, and the most likely reason for that is because you are his mate, he explained. Wonderful! I heard a delighted Arrow exclaim in the background. I groaned, but I'm human, I protested. Marcus chuckled at me. That doesn't change anything. Dulla, vampires can still find their mates, even if it's a human. They just normally change them fairly soon after. Oh, I said lamely, trying to process all of this information. I'm surprised that Arrow didn't teach you about vampire mates before, Marcus mused. Didn't you know that vampires mate for life, and that when they first touch their mate, they feel a spark jump between them, which is them bonding for eternity? He asked me. Oh, so that's what that was, I muttered, remembering back to when I first shook Edward's hand. So he is your mate, I heard Arrow declare happily in the background. I listened to them quietly for a little while longer, as they all congratulated me on finding my mate before hanging up to go and start dinner for Charlie. I continued to think about everything Marcus had said as I made dinner, unsure of what to think about Edward being my mate. I knew it explained many things, like the way I felt around him, how content I was when he touched me, and how lost I felt when he wasn't there. I sighed as I realized that he obviously had no idea that I was his mate. He had looked just as shocked as me when we felt the spark, though I suspected Jasper, and probably Alice as well, both knew. Dinner with Charlie was a quiet affair, as I told him how nice the Cullens were, and that I was really enjoying my stay here. He seemed pleased that I liked forks so much, and I was glad that I had come. The rest of the week passed by relatively quietly, Edward still acting as if there was a wall of glass between us. Santiago had told me during our phone call that my Miserati would be arriving on Friday afternoon, and when I told Rose, she immediately invited me to stay for the weekend so that we could work on it. Alice got a faraway look before she squealed and bounced with excitement. "Oh, Bella, we're going to have so much fun," she exclaimed. I didn't doubt her. When Friday afternoon finally came, I found myself chafing in my truck as I willed it to go faster, eager to see my new car. I finally reached the Cullen mansion to find the whole family minus Edward staring at my new car. I hurriedly parked and rushed over. "Hi, Esme. Carlisle." I greeted them before turning to fully appreciate my beautiful, shiny new midnight blue Maserati GTS. I sighed with happiness. Rose held out my keys, and I excitedly took them. "Jump in," I told Rose and Alice as I got into the driver's seat. The car purred to life, and I revved the engine and took off out of the driveway. We sped away from Forks. I wasn't going to risk being pulled over by my father and having to explain why I was speeding in a brand new, very expensive car, though I was fairly certain that Alice would warn me before that happened. After we took a short joyride, I headed back to the Cullens discussing with Rose on the way what kind of enhancements we should make. When we arrived back, I took one look at Emmett's sad, disappointed face and sighed. I chucked Jasper the keys. "Take Emmett and knock yourselves out," I said. Emmett looked happy for a minute before he frowned. "How come I don't get to drive?" he whined. I chuckled at him because I want my car to come back in one piece, and Jasper is more likely to keep it that way. He shrugged, accepting my explanation, and he and Jasper were soon heading out of the driveway. I spent the rest of the afternoon in the lounge with Esme, Alice, and Rose. I helped Rose plan the modifications to my Maserati, which we would begin tomorrow, Rose assuring me that they would all be done by next week. I didn't doubt her, with no need for sleep. I was sure Rose would be in the garage for most of next week's nights. Emmett and Jasper gave us back the keys when they came back, singing the car's praises. Once I was finished with Rose and she went outside to do some work on her own car, I turned to see what Alice was doing. I found her sketching 3 dresses. "What are you doing, Alice?" I asked, trying to get a better look. "I'm designing the dresses we're going to be wearing for the Girls' Choice Spring Dance that's coming up in 3 weeks. "There's a dance coming up?" I asked, confused that I hadn't heard it mentioned before. "Yep." Alice chirped happily, "and we're all going. I've already asked Jasper, of course, and Rose has asked Emmett, who are you going to ask?" I hadn't really thought about it," I muttered. Remembering my promise to my Volterra vampires that I would go to all the dances and send them pictures, I groaned, realizing that I would need to ask someone. To be honest, the only person that came to mind that I wouldn't mind going with was Edward. I sighed. That wasn't really an option with him avoiding me. In fact, it hadn't escaped my notice that even though I was in his house, he had purposely locked himself in his room to keep away from me. I had a feeling that I wouldn't be catching any glimpses of my mate at all this weekend. I knew he was in his room due to my shield. Once I had met a person, I could identify them when I wrapped shield around them, as long as they were within a 5-mile radius, because they all felt different in my mind. When I let my shield fan out to shroud everyone in the house, I could feel Jasper in the library, Emmett in his room, Edward in his room, Carlisle in his study, Rosalie in the garage, and Alice, Esme, and I in the lounge room. I set my shield out in a 5-mile radius and found no other sentient beings in the area, only small woodland creatures, before I withdrew it again. Oh well, you have a couple of weeks to ask someone else, mused, bringing me back from my thoughts. I shrugged. I knew the only person I would ask was Edward. I would rather not go and face the wrath of 5 angry female Volterra vampires than have to go with the likes of Mike, Eric, or Tyler, whose eyes now followed my every more at school like a puppy's. But I figured that I might as well ask Edward. It wouldn't hurt to try. In fact, I was curious to see whether he would turn me, his mate, down. As soon as I made my decision, I saw Alice's face look blank for a second. Before she smiled happily at me, I took that as a good sign, and I threw myself into helping Alice design the dresses. All too soon it was dinner time, and I was surprised to find that Esme was an incredibly talented cook, especially for someone who couldn't taste what she made. With the exception of Edward, we were all sitting at the dinner table, which I guess didn't get used very often, with me eating and pretending not to notice that they were simply rearranging the food on their plates, or, I suspected, placing bits in napkins on their laps. I took my first bite of the chicken Alfredo and moaned, "Esme, this is delicious." I complimented her. She beamed in appreciation, and the others chimed in with their own expressions of appreciation, their faces of mild disgust not matching their words. Once I had finished dinner, and Esme had banned me from helping her clean up, I sized up the vampires in front of me. "Are any of you good at chess?" I asked hopefully. "I have trouble finding good opponents," I explained. Jasper's eyes lit up. "As a matter of fact, Bella, I happen to be very good at chess. In fact, I'm one of the best players in the house. Only Edward and Alice can beat me." "Yeah, but they cheat," Emmett muttered. "Well, in that case, Jasper, I would love to play against you, the best of 5, I suggested. "If you think you can beat me," he said cockily before leading me out into the lounge room and setting up a chessboard on the coffee table. Everyone followed us out, no doubt curious to see whether I could actually hold my own against a vampire who had probably been playing for hundreds of years. I let Jasper win the first game while I got a feel for his tactics. Then I proceeded to thoroughly beat him in the second game. "Checkmate," I said smugly. His mouth dropped open in shock, and I could feel the vampires behind me shaking with laughter. "Unbelievable," he muttered under his breath as he reset the board for our third game. This time I could feel his determination to win, but using a tactic Caius had taught me, I eventually managed to win again. Emmett burst into raucous laughter as Jasper began to look annoyed. The fourth game, Jasper won again, this time using a combination of tactics I had never seen before and catching me off guard. He looked at me triumphantly as he got me into checkmate. I gritted my teeth in determination as we started our last game. This one went on for ages, neither of us willing to concede defeat. Finally, with each of us having only a queen, castle, and king left on the board, I managed to surround him. "Checkmate," I yelled triumphantly, jumping up excitedly. "Go Bella!" Emmett cheered behind me. Jasper just smiled, graceful in defeat. "Congratulations, Bella, you are an excellent opponent. We will definitely have to do this again." I nodded enthusiastically. "I'm so glad I managed to find someone who can hold their own at chess here in Forks." My euphoric mood, however, was soon dimmed by Carlisle, casually observing, "A friend of mine in Italy has a similar tactic to that." I made a conscious effort not to stiffen as I smiled at him. "Your friend must be an excellent player then," I commented, struggling to keep my enthusiasm levels up so that Jasper wouldn't notice anything. Not long after, it was time for me to go to bed. I walked into the spare room to find it fully furnished with a beautiful king-size bed, a bedside table and lamp, and bookshelves. On the wall was a framed canvas print of one of the photos we had had someone take during our shopping trip. It showed Rose, Alice, and I sitting together at the top of Woe's huge water slide, screaming with excitement. I smiled at the happy memories it evoked as I got ready for bed. My bed was extremely comfortable, and I was soon sleeping peacefully. As usual, my dreams mainly consisted of Edward, The rest of the weekend mainly consisted of me helping Rose in the garage with my Maserati as we discussed cars, or beating Emmett at video games, much to his disappointment. Emmett just couldn't believe how I knew all the tips and tricks to winning almost every game he had, as I smugly thought about all my gaming sessions with Felix and Dimitri. Bella, he whined at me, how'd you get a better gun than me? You just have to know where to look, Em, I said haughtily, laughing at his expression. I soon got tired of video games, though, and I took a break, going to the bathroom. As I came back, I passed by Carlisle's study and noticed that he was reading the same medical journal Aunt Sulpicia had sent me. I stopped, curious to get his impression. Have you read about the new wonder drug Cortland yet? I asked, leaning in his doorway. He looked up at me in surprise. You've read this? He asked incredulously, indicating the journal. I shrugged and nodded. I read it earlier this week, I muttered, suddenly aware that I had just shown them, yet again, how different I was from normal humans, all because I was curious to get his opinion. I decided that I had already jumped in, might as well start swimming. Personally, I think this drug had some great attributes and the potential to make the lives of many much better, but the price is going to be a bit of a problem, I observed, making my way into the office and settling in one of the chairs. Carlisle nodded in agreement. It's a pity that it costs so much to manufacture. It would have great benefits if it was going to be available worldwide. In fact, I have a patient that I would love to trial some on, but I'm afraid it's much too expensive for him to be able to afford it, he sighed. Of course, the side effects could be a bit of a problem too, I observed. Yes, he agreed, but they don't happen with everyone, and I think if they started off with small doses and gradually increased the medication, the patients would be less likely to experience the side effects. I agreed, and we continued to debate the pros and cons of the new drug. That is how we were found 4 hours later, still discussing the drug, as the curious faces of Esme, Alice, and Jasper looked in through the open doorway. When they heard what we were discussing, their expressions turned to amusement and shock. Esme looked pleased. Honey, as happy as I am that you have found someone new to discuss your new medical journal with, Bella hasn't eaten for a while, and it's time for dinner, she informed us. I reluctantly got up, stiff from sitting still for so long, and followed them downstairs. Dinner was similar to the night before, Esme once again producing a delicious meal, and soon after I bid them good night and went to bed. I woke up with a start in the middle of the night, my sixth sense telling me someone was close by. I cast out my shield, searching, and found someone standing outside my closed door. I recognized him instantly. Edward, I breathed. With my shield wrapped around him, I felt him stiffen slightly before relaxing. I knew instinctively that he had been in my room watching me sleep. I just didn't know why. I hoped I hadn't been sleep-talking. My Volturi vampires had told me that it was something I did often, and with my dreams constantly revolving around Edward lately, I could only imagine what I had said. I sighed before rolling over and going back to sleep. I knew I wasn't going to get any answers tonight. The next day I went home early, thanking them all for having me. I spent a quiet day at home with Charlie, doing mundane things like cleaning, cooking, and getting ahead on schoolwork. It was relaxing and it gave me time to sort through my hectic and confusing week. I went to sleep that night, peaceful, as I wondered what my next week of high school would bring. One thing was for sure, with 5 vampires in school, it was bound to be anything but boring. The next couple of days at school were fairly normal, with the Cullens all being their usual friendly selves, and Edward ignoring me. I had gotten over feeling hurt by his silence, and now I just felt annoyed. The rest of his family didn't see the need to avoid me. So why did he? I decided I was going to have to tell them soon, but I knew what they were. Hopefully that would make Edward relax and start talking to me again. During these days, though, sometimes I would catch Edward staring at me, and when our eyes met, neither of us could look away. It happened a few times, once in biology, and twice while we were sitting together at lunch. The first time our eyes met, we stared intensely at each other, completely oblivious to the rest of the class, until Mr. Banner interrupted us by asking me a question about meiosis. The second and third times, Alice interrupted us, giving us a knowing smile as she did and confirming my suspicions that she knew we were mates. In fact, she had probably seen some of our future together. Despite these looks, Edward still didn't talk to me until Wednesday arrived. I had just joined a still silent Edward at my biology table when Mike walked up. To give him credit, since his little talk with Emmett, he had stopped being so cocky around me and usually either avoided me or was incredibly polite. Still, it was a little odd for him to approach me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Edward stiffen slightly, and surmised that whatever Mike was up to, Edward didn't like it. So, Bella, I just wanted to apologize again for treating you like that on your first week. He had an appropriately abashed look on his face, but I could tell he was lying. I mentally groaned. Couldn't this guy take a hint? I tried to smile, which it came out closer to a grimace, as he continued to talk. So Jessica asked me to the spring dance, he stated. I grinned happily. If he was going with her, he wouldn't be asking me out. That's great, Mike, I exclaimed. He frowned slightly. Yeah, well, I told her I would think about it. I grimaced slightly at that. I thought I'd wait and see if you asked me first, because I would totally go with you. He finished with a wink. Next to me, Edward's hand clenched into a fist, and I half hoped that he would backhand Mike across the room for asking out his mate. No such luck. I put on my best fake smile. Sorry, Mike, but I've already got someone in mind to ask, and it isn't you, I said as sweetly as possible. I would rather walk naked through fire than go to the dance with him. In the first stroke of luck I had had all day, the class started, and Mike was forced to go to his seat. I turned slightly, and once again my eyes were locked into a staring match with Edward's, but this time his eyes held a type of emotion I couldn't identify. Once again we were interrupted by Mr. Banner, and as Edward turned to answer, I let my hair fall around my face, hiding the sudden blush I now had on my cheeks. I could feel Edward's gaze on me throughout the lesson, and eventually he whispered softly, Tu és tão bela e ainda assim tão difícil de ler, Portuguese, for you are so beautiful and yet so hard to read. My eyes darted up to his in shock. I knew he hadn't meant for me to understand it, but I was glad that I did. And if I was being honest, I was pleased that he thought I was beautiful, and smug that he couldn't read my mind. Eu estou longe de ser bela, e fico contente por ser difícil de ler. I'm hardly beautiful, and I'm thankful that I'm hard to read, I whispered back in flawless Portuguese. He looked at me in astonishment. The Tandaan Koian Filipino for, I'll have to remember that. He muttered to himself softly, obviously filing away that I understood. Portuguese. I grinned. Sempre naman, yes you will, I replied, yet again surprising him with my knowledge of yet another language. This time he smiled softly back, and I could see from his eyes that he was testing me. Amali bilo koji, yamo govoriti, yazika kayo nechete razumieti. Is there any languages I can speak that you won't understand? He asked in perfect Croatian. My smile broadened. Nisnam ali možete zadržati pokušavate otkriti. I don't know, but you can keep trying and find out, I replied, cocking my eyebrow in challenge. He just smiled back before addressing my earlier comment. You are beautiful, Bella, he said, his eyes showing that he was being truthful. I shrugged. I knew I wasn't ugly, but having lived with a family of inhumanly gorgeous vampires for most of my life, my perception of beauty was rather swayed, and it was hard to see myself as anything but plain in comparison. Whatever, Edward. I dismissed his comment, although secretly I was tingling with happiness. He looked like he was going to reply, but the bell went. Realizing my time with Edward was over, and that he would probably go back to ignoring me, I quickly turned and packed up my books. I stood, surprised to find that we were the only ones left in the class. I was startled when I heard him address me. Bella? He asked. I sighed, turning around to face him, my previous anger at him ignoring me resurfacing. What? Are you talking to me now? I demanded. He smiled softly. No, not really, he admitted. I glared at him, and he cringed slightly. I'm sorry I've been treating you like this, but it's better this way, he explained. At my disbelieving look, he continued. It's better if we're not friends. Bella, I'm not a good friend for you. It was obvious that he truly believed that he was bad for me. For some reason that made me madder. Whatever, Edward, maybe if you'd figured that out a little sooner, you could have saved yourself all this regret and just let the van hit me. I hissed angrily, my eyes fierce. He looked stunned and his expression turned angry. You think I regret saving you? He asked, stepping forward until we were nose to nose. I glared up at him. Don't you? I said harshly. He matched my expression. You don't know anything, he growled before stepping back from me, his jaw clenched. I picked up my books and hurried out of the classroom, heading for gym. I know a lot more than you think, Edward, I thought rebelliously. Still seething from our encounter, stupid vampire mate thought he could ignore me for a week and I would be friendly when he finally decided to talk to me again. Unfortunately for me, my day did not get any better. Before I could get to my truck after school, I was accosted by Eric. I sighed. I had a sneaking suspicion that this conversation wasn't going to be one I'd enjoy. Sure enough, Eric didn't disappoint. "Hi, Bella," he managed to stutter out. "Hi, Eric," I smiled softly at him. He wasn't a bad kid, a little shy, but relatively nice. I just didn't really like him. We had nothing in common. "I was wondering if you would go to the dance with me," he said quickly, his words merging into one. If I hadn't grown up with fast-whispering vampires, I wouldn't have understood a word he had said. I decided to let him down easily, since he wasn't really a bad guy. I smiled apologetically. "Sorry, Eric, but I already have someone in mind that I'd like to ask," I explained. Although thinking about it now, I was still angry at Edward, so maybe I wouldn't ask him after all. "Oh yeah," he said awkwardly. "That's okay. Bye, Bella." He quickly made his escape, and I sighed in relief as I got into my truck. I heard a low chuckle and turned to see Edward getting into his car. I glared at him and reversed out, but I was soon cut off behind Edward, who had blocked me and was now waiting for his siblings, who were slowly heading over to him, confusion evident on their faces. I glared at his car, tempted to dent it with my truck, and wondered why Edward had purposely stopped me from leaving. It didn't take long for my answer to arrive in the form of Tyler knocking on my window. I rolled it down. "Hi, Tyler. I'm sorry you're stuck behind me," I said, gritting my teeth and praying that he wasn't going to ask me to the dance. God must hate me. "Oh, that's fine, Bella. I just thought that while you're stuck here, I'd ask you if you were going to ask me to the spring dance," he said with confidence in his tone. My jaw clenched in annoyance. "Sorry, Tyler, but I already know who I want to ask. And it isn't you." I informed him harshly, my quota of patience for the day well and truly used up. "Oh," he said, seeming surprised that it wasn't him I was planning to ask. "That's okay, we still have prom," he said cheerfully, as he walked back to his car. I stared after him in disbelief. There was no way I was going to prom with him. I shuddered at the thought. I turned back to see the rest of the Cullens getting into the Volvo, with Edward shaking with laughter in the driver's seat. No doubt he had found my run in with Tyler funny. I thought furiously as he drove away. That night, I was woken by another feeling that someone was watching me, and as I cast my shield out, I realized that yet again, Edward was watching me sleep, this time from the tree outside my window. I rolled over, realizing there was nothing I could do about it right now. I had no idea why he seemed to find watching me sleep so fascinating, but I couldn't help feeling slightly warmer at the thought of being close by. I just hoped that I wouldn't say anything embarrassing in my sleep. I fell back to sleep quickly, for some reason feeling more comfortable knowing my mate was close by. The next day, I drove to school, desperately trying to forget about my unhealthy obsession with Edward Cullen. Of course, as soon as I spotted his silver Volvo, I was back to my thoughts about him. My only consolation was that, judging by his prescience outside my room last night, he was just as obsessed with me as I was with him. I was surprised when I got out of my truck, and Edward immediately approached. "Hello, Bella," he said softly, smiling at me. I stared at him suspiciously, wondering why he was talking to me again. "Hey, Edward." I smiled hesitantly. Then I remembered him purposely stopping me escaping from Tyler after school yesterday. "So what was with the big hold-up yesterday in the parking lot?" I asked, my eyes narrowing into slits. He looked amused. "I didn't want Tyler to miss his chance," he said, his eyes dancing and a smile forming on his face. I was momentarily distracted by how unbelievably gorgeous he looked when he was smiling. Then I frowned, furious at being set up. "Why you?" My fists clenched in anger, and I couldn't think of a word bad enough to describe him. I wanted so badly to hit him with my shield and throw him through a building, or at the very least, place a thin ring of my shield around one of his fingers and compress until his finger fell off. I figured that was reasonable. I knew it would reattach. I had cut off limbs from both Felix and Dimitri with my shields before, when they aggravated me. Of course, realizing that I could do neither without revealing myself, I settled for growling at him. "So were you trying to irritate me to death since Tyler's van didn't do the job?" I had to admit, at the moment I was more likely to die from being annoyed by Edward than I was by a van hitting me. Edward's eyes flashed angrily. "You are utterly absurd, Bella." I simply glared at him. "Why are you talking to me anyway? Didn't you say you didn't want to be friends?" "I only said it would be better if we weren't friends, not that I didn't want to be," he clarified. I rolled my eyes. "Well, thanks for clearing that up," I said sarcastically as I continued walking towards the school buildings. "What did you want to talk about anyway?" He tensed suddenly, and surprisingly, he looked nervous. Well, I wanted to ask you something." He started. I stopped, and looked up at him. His eyes were unsure. I sighed. Spit it out, Edward. Well, normally I wouldn't do this, since it's supposed to be a girl's choice dance, and I heard you say you already had someone in mind to ask, but seeing as 3 guys have already asked you, He trailed off nervously, shoving a hand through his gorgeous bronze hair. My mouth opened in shock, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't find this situation amusing. Edward was nervous about asking me to the spring dance. Internally, I was doing a happy dance. Well, since you haven't actually asked yet, and it is a girl's choice, would you go to the spring dance with me, Edward? I asked, searching his eyes for my answer. He smiled. I would love to, Bella. Then he looked thoughtful. But what about the guy you wanted to ask? I rolled my eyes. You were the guy I was going to ask, Edward. I was exasperated. Evidently, Alice hadn't told him who I had wanted to ask. Oh, he looked pleased. Sit with me at lunch? He asked suddenly. I frowned, confused. I always sit with you and your family at lunch. I know, but I meant, would you sit with me by ourselves? He explained. My eyes widened in astonishment and confusion. Okay, I agreed. He gave me a beautiful grin then. Thank you, Bella. The bell went, and we turned towards our classes. As if he suddenly felt guilty, he stopped. You really should stay away from me, he warned, then kept walking. I watched for a second. Too late, I thought dryly. I continued towards my class, eagerly anticipating lunch. I'm sorry they haven't been showing up lately. I've noticed that there are quite a few stories that are having the same problem. Hopefully Fanfic will fix it soon. Over 400 reviews already. I have to say thanks, guys. Especially those who review almost every chapter. It makes me happy to know that you keep reading it and haven't gotten bored yet. Hopefully it'll stay that way. For those wondering, Bella will be telling them she knows they are vampires soon, but she will not be telling them about the Volturi for a while longer. She will just feel guilty. My story will combine some parts of New Moon and Eclipse, but as this is a Bella Edwards story and will not have much Jacob, I'm undecided as to how much of a part he and the wolves will play right now. I will only be including parts I like, and the timeline will be different. The rest of my morning passed in anticipation of lunch, and when I finally reached the cafeteria, my eyes eagerly searched for Edward. He was sitting alone, a tray of food already waiting on the table. I noted that he had picked my favorites, pizza, lemonade, and an apple. He gave me a crooked grin as our eyes met, and I immediately headed for him, ignoring the jealous stares I was receiving from Jessica and Lauren and the amused and curious glances of the other Cullens as they realized where I was heading. I reached the table and sat down opposite Edward. He slid the tray of food towards me, and I took a bite of pizza, chewing slowly. I looked up at him. He seemed unsure. Well, this is different. I started. Well, I decided that if I was going to hell, I might as well do it thoroughly, he explained cryptically. I frowned. It sounded as if he thought he would be condemned for being friendly to me. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. I stated, confused. I know I'm kind of counting on that. He smiled softly. So what brought this on? I asked, genuinely curious about the reason behind his sudden change in demeanor. His eyes turned intense. I'm tired of trying to stay away from you, Bella, he admitted. Then don't, I said, looking deeply into his eyes as I reached out and placed my hand on his. He flinched, and then seemed surprised when I didn't react to the coldness of his skin. Eventually, he retraced his hand. I unscrewed the cap off the lemonade and took a sip, closely observing him. So, in plain terms, are we friends now? I asked, hopefully. Friends, he mused, seeming to think it over. Or not, I muttered. Well, we can try, I suppose, but I'm warning you now that I'm not a good friend for you. You say that a lot, I observed. I'm hoping that eventually you'll heed my warning. If you were smart, you'd stay away from me, he explained, his eyes worried. I think you've made your opinion of my intellect more than clear, I said angrily. He smiled apologetically. So, while I'm being not smart, we can be friends? I clarified. He nodded, yes. I stared at him for a while longer. I wanted to tell him I knew that he was a vampire, and that I didn't care, but I knew this wasn't the right time or place to do it. Eventually, his voice cut through my thoughts. What are you thinking? He asked. I smiled. I doubted that he'd ever had to ask that before. I was just wondering whether you were more like Batman or Superman, I joked. He smiled a little at that, but then his expression turned serious. What if I'm not the superhero Bella? What if I'm the bad guy? He asked. It was obvious that he really believed he was bad, and I felt compassion for him. I looked up into his eyes, wanting to convey my message with sincerity. "You may be dangerous, Edward, but I will never believe you are bad," I said firmly, my gaze never wavering from his. His expression was surprised, then hopeful. I knew he was a long way from fully believing that, but I was determined to eventually make him see that he was good. We remained locked in each other's gazes until the bell rang, and I jumped slightly startled. "We'd better get to class," I mumbled reluctantly. He sighed. "I'm not going today," he informed me. My eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Why not?" I demanded. He shrugged. "Sometimes ditching is healthy." I furrowed my eyebrows in confusion. Obviously he knew something about the class that I didn't, but I knew there was no point arguing. I contemplated ditching with him, but I didn't want it getting back to Dad. "Well, I'll see you later then." I smiled and unwillingly left the cafeteria, looking back at him one last time. I arrived just before Mr. Banner, and I settled at my lonely lab table, curious to see the reason for Edward ditching. When I saw what Mr. Banner had with him, I mentally kicked myself. I should have known. Blood typing. Well, Edward was right. It was definitely healthier for the other students, if the vampires ditched class when everyone was blood typing. I tried to focus on Mr. Banner's demonstration, but the moment he pricked Mike's finger with a needle in the scent, a combination of rust and salt, hit me, I started feeling clammy and faint. I slowly lowered my head to the desk, trying not to breathe through my nose. Mr. Banner noticed. When he handed out kits to everyone, "Bella, are you feeling all right?" "No, sir," I muttered softly. "Do you need to see the nurse?" I nodded slowly. "Can I have a volunteer to take Bella to the nurse?" he asked the rest of the class. I didn't even have to look up to know that Mike would volunteer, eager to get his hands on me, but I didn't have the strength to fend him off as he helped me out of the classroom, and we headed in the direction of the office. Once we were outside and out of Mr. Banner's range of sight, I pushed Mike away and lay down on the path, the cold cement under my cheek. "Wow, Bella, you're green," Mike observed anxiously. I didn't answer. Just then I heard another very recognizable voice advancing towards me. "Bella," Edward called, concern in his tone. "Go away, Edward," I grumbled. I didn't need him seeing me like this. He ignored me. "What's wrong?" he asked Mike. "I don't know," he replied nervously. "We were blood typing in biology, but she didn't even prick her finger. I was taking her to the nurse, but she wouldn't go any further." "I'll take her. You go back to class," Edward said, in a tone that brooked no arguments. Mike didn't even bother to reply, just turned and headed back to class. I suddenly found myself off the ground and cradled bridal style in Edward's arms. "Put me down," I demanded, trying to sound angry, but in my current state, it came out pitifully weak. He ignored me, and as we walked, I felt myself relaxing against his comforting, strong arms, my head resting softly on his shoulder. "So you faint at the sight of blood?" He seemed amused. I shrugged. I knew he'd find it ironic. All the Volterra vampires did too, and not even your own blood either. I sighed, and just enjoyed the feeling of being in his arms. All too soon, I felt us enter a warm building, and I opened my eyes to see Mrs. Cope's shocked face. "She fainted in biology," Edward explained, walking past her and placing me on the bed in the nurse's room. The nurse quickly put down e-book she had been reading. "They're blood typing in biology," he told her. She nodded in understanding. "There's always one." Edward silently shook, holding Mrs. Laughter at that, and I opened my eyes again to glare at him. "I'll be right back with an ice pack, dear," the nurse told me before turning to Edward. "You can go back to class now." Edward looked as he confidently, his face giving no indication that he was lying to her. "I'm supposed to stay with her." The nurse seemed to accept it because she simply nodded and left the room. I rolled over onto my side facing him. "You could have warned me that they were blood typing today," I said petulantly. "I take it you don't react well to blood either," I stated. "Yes, and if I had known how you react to blood, I would have told you," he assured me, amusement still prominent in his eyes. I looked at him, annoyance written on my face. He chuckled softly. "You really scared me," he admitted. "I thought Mike was dragging your body off into the woods." "Ha!" Honestly, I've seen corpses with better color. I was concerned that I might have to avenge your murder. I had no doubt he would have. I chuckled softly, almost pleased by that thought. Then I felt guilty. Mike hadn't actually done anything bad enough to warrant me thinking like that. The nurse returned with an ice pack, which I held to my forehead, and I found that I was starting to feel a bit better, the walls of the room now staying still in my vision. Just then I heard the door to the outside office open, and Mrs. Cope called through, "We've got another one." I jumped off the bed so that the next person could use it, handing the nurse back her ice pack. "Here, I don't need this." I saw Edward stiffen slightly. "Oh no," he muttered anxiously. "Get out to the office, Bella," he warned. I smelt the first scent of blood and rushed out of the nurse's room, Edward hot on my heels. We passed Mike, helping a bleeding guy, towards the room we had vacated. I took a big breath of fresh air when we reached the receptionist's desk, grateful that there was no scent of blood. Edward turned to me, surprised. "You actually listened to me." "I smelt the blood," I explained. I had to admit that I was impressed with his ability to ignore fresh human blood. He looked confused. Humans can't smell blood. Humans, I thought. "Way to make yourself sound normal, Edward." "Well, I can. It smells like rust and salt. That's why I faint." He stared at me in silence until Mike came out. "You're looking better," Mike observed. I looked at him indifferently. I wasn't going to waste energy by actually bothering to talk to him. "So are you coming back to class?" I stared at him incredulously. "Are you kidding? You're still blood typing in there."
Oh, he looked sheepish.
"So did Jess ask you about coming to the beach with us this Saturday?" he asked. I nodded, recalling the conversation I'd had with Jessica during Treg. They were all going to Lawpush Beach, and I didn't really feel comfortable going there when I knew there was a pack of shapeshifters there. I didn't intend to make friends with the natural enemy of vampires, even if they did have a treaty with the Cullens. "I'm sorry, Mike, but I don't think I can come. I already have plans for Saturday," I said. I had been planning to check out the forest close to home, and maybe get in a bit of practice time with my shield if I could find a secluded spot and my vampire stalker wasn't around. "Oh, that's okay. Maybe another time." He looked disappointed, and I felt a slight twinge of guilt. "See you in gym," he said, heading back to class. I was not looking forward to a gym lesson where I would have to put up with his disappointed glances and pointless attempts at flirting. "Gym," I groaned. "I can take care of that," Edward whispered softly in my ear, and I felt my body give an involuntary shudder as his cool breath hit my neck. "Go sit down and look pale," he instructed. That wasn't a hard command to follow. I always looked pale, and after my recent fainting spell, I now had a pasty color very similar to a vampire's skin tone. I sat down and listened as Edward used his smooth velvet voice and compelling golden eyes to charm Mrs. Cope into letting us go home early. I could practically hear her start hyperventilating. I looked up as Edward came back over. Without asking, he picked me up again and carried me out. I protested weakly, not wanting to seem pathetic, but it was really too comfortable in his arms for me to move. We headed outside and towards the parking lot. A light drizzle had set in, and I lifted my face, grateful for the light rain that washed the perspiration from my forehead. "So what are your plans for the weekend?" Edward asked. I smiled. "I don't know," I replied truthfully. I just said that to get out of going to Lawpush. He seemed pleased by this. "I think I'll just stay around the house, maybe see where the trail behind the house leads," I explained. His body tensed slightly. "The woods aren't always safe, Bella. I don't think it's a good idea for you to go hiking alone." His concern warmed me slightly, but I knew I'd be perfectly safe. "Don't worry, Edward. I won't go far," I assured him. He didn't seem reassured. We reached the parking lot, and he immediately headed for his car. Realizing that he intended to take me home, I asked, "What about my truck?" He shrugged. "I'll get Alice to drop it off." "I'm perfectly fine. I can drive home," I protested half-heartedly. He didn't answer, just continued towing me towards his car. When we reached it, he opened the passenger door for me, gently placed me inside. He closed the door behind me and was soon in the driver's seat, starting up the engine. The silence was annoying me as we left the school, so I reached over and turned on his radio. To my surprise, Claire de Lune was playing. I relaxed, humming along to the music. He turned to me, a soft smile playing on his lips. "Sometimes, Bella, you don't seem 17, he observed. I shrugged, returning his smile. Just because I have taste in music doesn't mean I have to be old. I was always a mature child. I guess it stems from having a mother that is so childlike. I always ended up taking care of her," I explained, surprisingly myself by how open I was with Edward. It was good for her when I went to boarding school. She learned how to take care of herself, and she found Phil. "And you approve of him for your mother?" "Yes," I replied simply. "He's a couple years younger than her, but she's always been young for her age, so he suits her. Besides, he makes her very happy. I was very happy and partially relieved that Renee had found someone. I knew that in a couple of years I wouldn't be able to see her anymore, so I was incredibly pleased that she had someone else to take care of her now. "That's very considerate of you," he observed. Then he turned quiet, his voice lowering as he hesitantly asked, "Do you think your mother would be happy for you, no matter who your choice was?" His eyes looked anxious. "Yes, as long as she felt that that person loved me, she would be happy for me no matter what," I answered him, truthfully. I knew my mother, and if she truly felt I was happy, she would never stand in the way of it. That was why I'd been allowed to spend 6 months a year in Volterra. She knew how happy it made me. Edward looked thoughtful, his eyes showing some doubt at my statement. "So what about you, Edward?" I asked, distracting him from his thoughts. "When did Carlisle and Esme adopt you?" Then I winced, realizing what I'd asked. "Oh, I'm sorry, Edward. If it's too hard for you to think about, just forget it. I can be a little insensitive at times." I hastily backtracked. "No, it's fine," he assured me. "My real parents died a long time ago." "I'll bet," I thought dryly. "They both got very sick and died," he explained. I thought back in history, wondering if it was likely to be an epidemic that his parents had died in. "Where were you born?" I asked. "Chicago." I nodded at him as I sifted through my history lessons, immediately hitting on the Spanish influenza that went through the country in the early 1900s. I knew that that was the most likely one. No doubt Carlisle had been working as a doctor during that time. As I thought about it, I realized that that would make Edward around 100 years old, relatively young for a vampire. "What about your siblings?" I asked, having temporarily sated my curiosity about Edward. He sighed and looked outside. "Now that you mention them, I should be going back to pick them up." I suddenly realized that we had been stopped outside my house for the last 10 minutes, and I hadn't even noticed. He was avoiding my question. Oh well, it was better than lying to me. "Oh, sorry," I said, unbuckling my seatbelt and opening the door. "Thank you for the ride, Edward. I'll see you tomorrow." He looked apologetic. "Actually, Bella, Emmett, and I are going hiking up near Goats Rocks Wilderness, south of Mount Rainier, for the weekend, and we're leaving this afternoon." Oh, I tried not to look disappointed. Of course they needed to hunt. "Well, have fun," I told him, trying to sound enthusiastic. He smirked at me, obviously not buying it. "I'm sure we will." I finally stepped out of the car and closed the door. Just before I turned away, the window rolled down. Inside, Edward was still smiling. "Next time, Bella, you can tell me more about your family." I smiled at that as I watched him drive away. Which one? I thought to myself as I turned and headed inside. The next day at school, I spent in a rather melancholy mood, my mind constantly wandering back to thoughts of Edward. I felt strangely incomplete without him nearby, and I realized how dependent I had gotten on having him near. These days at school and at night, I almost always had a shield around Edward when he wasn't in my line of sight, so that I could feel that he was near. Knowing that he wasn't in school today had a major dampening effect on my mood, which was easily picked up at lunch by the 3 vampires who hadn't gone on the hiking trip. Alice was the first to say anything, her eyes sparkling humorously as she asked, "So, Bella, you seem a little down today, not missing a certain tall, handsome, bronze-haired brother of mine, are you?" "No," I lied quickly. Unfortunately, I could tell from the looks on their faces that they weren't buying my denial one bit. "Bella, has anyone ever told you that you're a terrible liar?" Jasper asked, causing Alice and Rosalie to snicker. I glared at him in response. He just laughed. Rose decided that it was her turn to tease me. Bella and Edward sitting in a tree, she trailed off suggestively, and I couldn't help but envision it. I blushed and all 3 of them laughed at me. They kept up their relentless teasing for the rest of the day, and I sighed with relief when I finally got into my truck and escaped from the school. I received a text from them not long after saying they were sorry they hadn't told me earlier, but they were going on a family camping trip for the weekend and wouldn't be back until Wednesday. I had to admit that I was a little saddened that I wouldn't be able to see them, but I knew the reason. The weather forecast for the weekend and early next week was sunny, and no doubt they wouldn't want to show off their sparkliness. While I was disappointed, I was happy to have the weekend to myself and do something peaceful. Being with Alice and Rose was tiring sometimes, although I enjoyed every moment of it. That night, I was surprised at dinner time, when the first words out of Charlie's mouth were, "So, have you asked anyone to the spring dance that's coming up?" My jaw dropped. I honestly hadn't expected him to know about that. And I wasn't sure how he'd take the news that I was actually going with a guy. I found myself desperately hoping that he would approve of Edward. Yes, actually, Dad, I asked Edward Cullen, and he said yes. Charlie's mouth opened slightly. "Edward Cullen, huh?" I didn't know you knew him so well. At least he wasn't panicking at the idea of me with a guy. Well, I met him through Rose and Alice, of course. He nodded in understanding. Well, the Cullens are great people, Bella, and I'm glad you've made such good friends. I suppose if you were going to date anyone, I would rather it be someone like Edward. He seems very responsible for his age. I grinned inwardly at that. If only Charlie knew just how old Edward was. Then I blushed as I registered his words. Dad, it's not like that. I mumbled, embarrassed. We could both hear the unspoken yet in the room. Thankfully, Charlie seemed to realize that I was sufficiently embarrassed, and he changed the subject. So what are your plans for the weekend, Bells? Any plans with the Cullens? I shook my head. No, Dad. They're all camping this weekend, so I'm just gonna hand around the house, maybe go outside and get some sun, and relax. What about you, Dad? Fishing again? He grinned at me. Yep, I found a new spot to try out. We'll have fun, Dad, I said as I got up and started washing the dishes. Will do, Bells, he answered as he left to go to the lounge and watch some sport. I had a harder time getting to sleep that night, knowing my favorite vampire wasn't nearby. By the time morning came, I was bleary-eyed and still tired as I got dressed and had a lonely breakfast. Charlie had already left for the day. I went shopping first, getting the groceries we'd need for me to cook meals for the two of us for the week. As I passed the library on my way home, I made a mental note to go to Seattle in the next few weeks for some books. I knew from my previous visits to Forks that the library was poorly stocked. I hoped to have found a way to incapacitate my truck by then so I could pick out a new car at the same time. I continued to think up different ways to destroy my truck until I got home. By the time I had unpacked the groceries and put on the first load of laundry, it was nearly midday, and the sun was shining brightly, a rare occurrence in Forks. I decided that it was the perfect time to go for a walk. I locked up the house and headed out into the backyard, where a trail stared in the back corner. Before heading into the forest, I cast my shield around a small boulder that sat at the nearby. This meant that as long as I stayed within 5 miles of home, I would never get lost, because I could simply feel my way back through my shield, now anchored around the boulder. I headed out into the forest, the sunshine streaming through in different places, tinted green by the trees. The peacefulness, while relaxing at first, soon brought Edward back to the forefront of my mind, and I found myself desperately longing for him to be near. I stopped after a couple of miles, incredibly frustrated with myself for acting so lovesick. Bringing up a shield, I threw it angrily at a large tree, causing it to break at the base of the trunk and topple over onto the tree behind it. My anger faded after that outburst, and I levitated myself up into the branches of another tree, about 100 feet up, and looked out, enjoying the scenery around me as I calmed down. Soon enough, though, I found myself wishing Edward was here to enjoy the view with me. I sighed. I thought hard about my reactions to Edward over the weeks, how his grin made me go weak, and how he constantly dazzled me with his eyes. I was more than a little annoyed that he unknowingly had such a large effect on me, yet I didn't seem to affect him at all. I knew we were mates, and I vividly remembered the spark that ran through me when we touched. Thinking about that, I realized that in all probability, all mates felt like half of them had been ripped away when the other wasn't near. Hopefully that meant that Edward was missing me too. As I continued to analyze my feelings, they all kept leading me back to the same conclusion. I was wholeheartedly in love with Edward Cullen, my vampire mate. Not long after I came to this conclusion, I realized that the sky had started to darken, so I jumped out of the tree, free-falling through the air, until I was about 10 feet away from the ground, where I cast a shield out underneath and caught myself like bouncing on a trampoline. I headed home, using the shield around the boulder in the backyard to guide me as I had deviated from the path. After my epiphany, I had a relatively quiet weekend. I no longer bothered to squelch my thoughts of Edward, knowing it was useless anyway. On Sunday night, I again woke up with the familiar feeling of being watched, and again found that Edward was nearby. This time, though, he wasn't outside my window. He was sitting frozen in the rocking chair. I didn't move or even open my eyes. Edward, I sighed contentedly before falling back to sleep, happy that he was back. EPOV. I arrived back with Emmett late Sunday night. Emmett was a little annoyed at me because I had been brooding throughout our hunting trip. I had missed Bella so much Not being able to be near her or at least track her through the minds of others like I usually did at school was torture. I knew without a doubt that I was in love with her, and I had tried to avoid her when I had figured it out after saving her from being hit by Tyler's van. However, I had not counted on just how mesmerizing Bella was, and after a week of ignoring her, I had snapped when Mike asked her to the spring dance. For a moment there, I had entertained the thought of breaking Mike's neck. I had felt unbelievably euphoric when she had asked me to the dance the next day, especially when I found out that I was the one she had been planning to ask all along, in spite of my previously frigid behavior to her. I had admitted to her that day that I couldn't stay away from her anymore, and I meant it. Bella was now the center of my universe, and being away from her was unbelievably difficult. I had taken to watching her sleep at night after her first night at our house. Not only did it mean I was closer to her, but I was intrigued by her sleep talking. I couldn't help it when I first heard her sleep talking and sighing my name, so every night after that, I spent watching her sleep, insanely happy when she murmured my name. Occasionally, she mentioned her mother and father, and one time she muttered something about beating Felix and Dimitri, but I had no idea what she was talking about. I figured it was random nonsense, perhaps some characters from a novel. When I thought about how she had planned to go hiking on the weekend, I nearly rushed back to Forks a day early. But Emmett had put his foot down. He told me that just because I was lovesick, it didn't mean I could get out of a hunting trip. In return for me staying, he promised not to tell Bella just how madly in love with her I was. I knew she was meant to be my mate, but she didn't even know what kind of dangerous creature I was. Jasper had finally slipped up in his thoughts the day that I saved Bella, and after getting the gist of his thoughts, I had turned to Carlisle, who had explained about the electricity I had felt when I touched Bella, and my fascination with her. It was another reason I had tried to stay away. She deserved so much better than me, a monster, and for that reason alone, I wasn't planning on telling her that she was my mate. I knew she didn't believe I was bad. That was obvious, and while part of me was overjoyed by that, another part wanted her safely away from me. I just didn't know if I could ever bear to part with her. Sunday night, I had happily run over to Bella's house. After enduring some comments from Emmett being called whipped by Jasper, and having the rest of the family smirk knowingly at me, I was eager to be near her. She had woken just after I settled in the rocking chair, her breath faltering for a minute. She didn't move or open her eyes, just sighed. Edward contentedly before going back to sleep. I felt warmth flood through me at her uttering my name. It was like she could sense that I was nearby, and was happy about it. I watched her for the rest of the night in adoration. Bella had to be the most amazing creature on the earth. I left just before the sun came up, incredibly disappointed that I couldn't go to school with her, and repulsed by my sparkling skin. I arrived home and changed before sitting down at my piano to pass the time until Bella woke up and left for school. As I played, I found the song morphing into a melody that had been running through my head for the last couple of days. It was a lullaby, beautiful and sweet, with a hint of power behind it. Bella, of course, had inspired it, her actions continually amazing me. I hadn't even noticed that Esme and Alice had crept up behind me while I played. They both looked like they would be crying if that was a possibility for vampires. "That was beautiful, Edward," Esme said softly, her eyes shining with happiness. Alice smiled as well, her thoughts in agreement with Esme's. "Bella will be leaving for school in 10 minutes, she informed me. I got up. "Thanks, Alice," I said as I left the house. I headed to the school and found a tree in the forest where I could sit on the branches and be in thought, hearing range of everyone in the school, without being close enough that anyone coming into the forest would see me sparkling. After what felt like an eternity, but was actually only a few minutes, I heard the chugging of Bella's truck in the distance, and she soon pulled into the parking lot. She was earlier than usual, and there weren't many people there. I watched as she grabbed her jacket and sat on it on one of the outside benches, soaking up the sun. The brightness brought out the beautiful red tones of her mahogany hair, and she seemed to be enjoying it. As she settled, she turned and looked into the forest, as if she knew I was there, which was impossible for a human. I was well out of range of even a vampire's eyes. She smiled softly before turning and picking up a novel to read. Wuthering Heights. She sat there reading for a while, not noticing how the school was piling up with people until Mike approached her. I let loose an involuntary growl. "Hi, Bella," he said, causing her to jump slightly and put the book down. She rolled her eyes at him, obviously not liking the fact that he had approached her again. "Hi, Mike," she answered shortly. From his thoughts, I could tell that he thought she was happy to be near him. Of course she likes me. Who doesn't? I'll bet she only asked Cullen because she felt sorry for him, or his sisters asked her to. I'm positive she'd love to go out with me tonight, and maybe dessert could be at my house. I snarled as his thoughts turned vulgar and images played in his head of Bella naked at his house. So Bella, how about dinner with me tonight? He winked confidently at her, obviously forgetting that all his previous attempts to ask her out had failed. I tightened my grip on the branch above my head and sat up. Through Mike's eyes, I watched Bella's eyes narrow. Mike, I am only going to say this one time, so you'd better listen. I do not like you, and I never will, so stop asking me out. In fact, don't come near me at all. If you can't do that, I will ask Emmett tattoo my instructions into your face with his fist. By the end, she was snarling viciously at him. He backed away. Damn, she looks scary. If looks could kill, I'd probably be 6 feet under right now, he thought to himself as he mumbled, "Sorry, Bella," before walking off as quickly as he could. I sat back in the tree, letting the branch I had been holding fall to the ground in pieces. I was proud of her, and I had to admit, just a little intimidated by her glare. I followed her through her classmates for the rest of the day, happy when she made friends with Angela. A very kind girl, whose thoughts were always kind. Jessica tried to prise gossip out of Bella again, but Bella continuously brushed her off. At lunch, I listened in interest. Bella was talking to Angela, always a person who included others. Angela offered, "Bella, would you like to come dress shopping with us tomorrow night?" I looked on as Bella smiled apologetically. "Sorry, Angela, but I already have my dress." Alice deigned it for me. I frowned in confusion. Alice hadn't mentioned anything to me at all. "But I would be happy to go with you and help you pick out yours," Bella offered, seeing Angela's disappointed face. Angela smiled. "Thanks, Bella, that would be wonderful," she said gratefully. "We'll pick you up right after school tomorrow," she offered. Bella smiled back and the conversation changed to another topic. I continued watching her all day, following her home from school, and watching entranced as she hummed to some of my favorite classical songs and cooked dinner that night. I only went home to change clothes and shower, racing back to watch Bella sleep. The next day was relatively boring as I yet again stalked Bella through everyone's minds. Eventually school let up, and after seeing Bella safely off to Port Angeles in Jessica's car, I ran back to the house for my Volvo. If Bella was going to Port Angeles, then I was too. EPOV. I reached Port Angeles only minutes after Bella, Jess, and Angela due to my rather fast driving skills. I couldn't get out of the car as the sun was still a few hours from setting, so I was stuck here. I settled and listened to Jess and Angela's thoughts. They had been relatively easy to find as there was only one store in town that sold dresses suitable for a spring dance. I was a gentleman and pulled out of their minds every time they went into the change rooms. Most of their talk was uninteresting observations about the dresses Jess and Angela tried on, and I found it incredibly boring to listen to. I knew that Bella was going to look much better than any of the other girls at the dance. She always did. I was looking forward to tomorrow when I would finally be able to be with Bella again and actually talk to her. I would be sharing lunch and biology with Bella again, although I probably couldn't steal her away from my family again and keep her to myself. Alice had complained loudly after we sat away from them last week and had threatened my piano if I tried it again. Besides, I reasoned, as much as I wanted her all to myself, my family loved her, and she seems to love them too. I continued to tune into the conversation of the three girls in the dress shop. One conversation in particular caught my interest. Jess had asked Bella about her previous boyfriends, and Bella had told them that she'd never had one before. I found that astounding. It couldn't be for lack of interest in her. Bella was quintessential. "I've never found anyone I wanted to date before," she explained. "What about Edward?" Angela suggested knowingly. Bella blushed, looking adorable. "Maybe," she answered. "If he ever asks me out." I was intrigued. Did that mean that she would go out with me if I asked? My dead heart felt like it was beating at the thought. "Well, if he doesn't, at least Tyler is taking you to prom," Jessica mentioned. I growled lightly. Nobody was getting their hands on my Bella. I was definitely going to ask her to prom soon. I was pleased with Bella's reaction, though. Her eyes opened wide with surprise, and she got a look of disgust on her face. "Tyler?" she asked incredulously. At their nod, she continued. "I would never go with Tyler. I'd rather go alone than with him. I was insanely pleased by this, but was shocked by her next words. Besides, she continued, I'll be going to the prom with Edward. She stated it with complete confidence, and I began to wonder if she would always throw me for loops like this. Yet again I found myself wishing I could read her mind. What could make her so sure that I would ask her to prom? Of course I intended to, but I didn't know how she could know that. I pulled out of their thoughts after that as Angela was trying on another dress and Jess was wondering what kind of lingerie but for the night of the dance. Apparently, she had great plans for Mike. I was disgusted by the turn of her thoughts. Those two were made for each other. Bella seemed content to read, so I decided to give them a little privacy as I pondered Bella. She was incredibly confusing to me. The way her mind worked was a mystery that I desperately wanted to solve, yet somehow I doubted that I'd ever be able to, even if I could read her mind. After puzzling for some time, I searched again for the thoughts of Jessica and Angela. I found them heading towards an Italian restaurant, La Bella Italia. I soon realized, however, that Bella wasn't with them, and hadn't been for some time. I got worried. From Jess and Angela's thoughts, I ascertained that Bella had gone off on her own in search of a bookstore. I groaned, hoping that she wouldn't run into any trouble on her own. I was uneasy. I didn't like not knowing where she was, so I drove to the only bookstore in Port Angeles, a New Age store. By the time I got there, the sun had almost set. I could see from the shopkeeper's thoughts, though, that nobody had entered the store in the last couple of hours, so it was obvious that Bella had taken one look and decided against entering. I checked back with Jess and Angel and found them in the restaurant ordering their food as they waited for Bella. Bella was still nowhere to be found. I anxiously drove around the streets near the restaurant and bookstore, searching frantically through everyone's thoughts for any sign of Bella. The sky was getting darker, and my only hope came from the thought that soon I would be able to get out and track Bella's scent. Finally, I found someone thinking about her, but my relief at having found her was extremely short-lived when I realized the dark turn of the thoughts I was hearing. I realized that the man had 3 companions, and they were all stalking Bella, their thoughts intent on raping her. I snarled angrily, gripping the steering wheel tightly as I drove towards the industrial area of Port Angeles. I didn't know exactly where she were. All I could see were tall buildings, but I knew roughly the area she was in. I hoped desperately that one of the men would look up and give me a clue so that I could find them. My rage continued to build as Bella walked on, seemingly oblivious to the dangerous threat closing in on her. Thankfully, a moment later, I spotted a street sign in one of the men's thoughts, and I recognized it. Changing my route slightly, I sped towards them, hoping I could get there before they heard her. I watched fretfully as she suddenly stopped and turned to face the 4 men shadowing her. They moved to surround her. How thoughtful of the little lady to not put up a fight, the leader thought, although it's almost disappointing. It's always more fun when they're feisty. Bella wouldn't be his first victim. He was surprised, however, when she simply looked straight into his eyes and smiled. To say I was shocked by her smile was an understatement. Only Bella would not find the situation she was in. Scary, any other young human girl would be rightfully terrified. The leader mentally ran, though, a list of his victims, none of whom had smiled. Even more surprising was Bella's next words. "Excellent," she said, and I started to wonder whether she should be admitted to a mental institution. I haven't had a good excuse to beat someone up in a long time. All our men were now disconcerted, but it only made them more determined. The leader stepped forward. "Hello, darling, we're gonna rock your world tonight," he smiled evilly at her, moving to grab her. Before he could get hold of her arm, she lashed out hard with her leg, her foot hitting the side of his thigh with a sickening crunch. For a moment I was worried that Bella had broken her foot, but I soon realized from the pain now clouding the leader's thoughts, and the funny angle his leg was sticking out, that she had broken his femur. I was stunned. She shouldn't have been able to break the largest bone in the human body with a simple leg kick. Bella didn't look surprised at all, though. She simply turned to the remaining 3 men. "Who's next?" she asked calmly. All 3 converged on her. One by one, she took them all down, using extensive martial arts moves that combined the use of her legs, arms, elbows, and knees. Every time she hit them, a bone would break, and if I hadn't been so worried about her and angry about them, I would have spent more time puzzling over her strength. Only one of the men managed to hit her, but Bella looked as if she didn't even notice. "You picked the wrong girl to mess with," she snarled at them. I agreed. I was going to tear them apart for intending to hurt her. I continued watching, infuriated at the men as I neared them. The men were now all in pain, 3 of them writhing on the ground, while the last one was still fighting Bella. I finally reached them, spinning the car onto the street at top speed, and letting the car spin around so that the passenger door was only meters away from Bella. Just as I reached over and opened it, Bella gave the last man a broken nose before viciously kicking him hard in the groin. He collapsed in pain, and my previous plans of killing them dissipated as I saw how thoroughly beaten they all were. I also knew that as much as I wanted to kill them for their thoughts, I also wanted Bella far away from these despicable creatures. Besides, I reasoned, these men weren't going to be moving anytime soon. I could always come back later. I was sure Rose would love to help me. All of these thoughts only took a few seconds as I looked out the open passenger door at Bella. Get in, I commanded, my tone betraying how murderously angry I was. She got in, grumbling, spoil sport, under her breath as she closed the door. My mind boggled over that comment as we sped away. I rushed through stop signs and red lights to get as far away from temptation as possible. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Bella look over at me and smile a little. Then she seemed to notice how angry I was. She sighed. So are you more angry because you didn't get to save me, or because those men were trying to rape me? She asked calmly. Yet again, I was left perplexed by how her mind worked. Her question distracted me slightly from my angry thoughts. The latter, I answered, before remembering that I should make sure Bella wasn't going into shock. Are you all right? I asked. I saw one of them hit you, I stated, baffled by the fact that she seemed completely calm and pain-free. Perhaps she was having a delayed reaction. She chuckled dryly. Trust me, Edward. I'm fine. For some reason, she seemed uncomfortable with this line of questioning as she quickly changed the subject. So, it looks like I'm gonna have to run Tyler over with my truck, she stated cheerfully as we finally came to a stop in a misused side road on the outskirts of Port Angeles. I had to chuckle at that. Why? He's telling everyone that he's taking me to prom, she huffed indignantly. So I figure that if I run him over, he'll probably get the picture that I don't want to go with him, and he'll stay away from me. Another thought seemed to occur to her. Maybe I could total my truck at the same time, she mused, her expression thoughtful. I laughed, my anger dissolving as I listened to her melodic voice and compared the beautiful, fragile girl calmly sitting beside me to the fierce, vicious creature I had seen in the rapist's thoughts. Bella was an enigma to me. She seemed to notice that I was calmer as she joined me in my laughter. You really are desperate for a new car, huh? I asked. Yep, she answered cheerfully. Suddenly, her expression changed as she noticed the time on the dashboard. She cursed. I was supposed to meet Angela and Jess at the restaurant hours ago, she groaned. I sighed and started the car, swiftly driving us back into town before parking in front of La Bella Italia. I hopped out and hurried over to Bella's door, opening it for her. She smiled up at me before accepting my proffered hand and stepping gracefully out of the car. I shut the door behind her, keeping her hand in mine, enjoying the warmth of it. She didn't seem to mind. I looked down the street and immediately noticed Jessica and Angela walking away from us in search of Bella. I nodded towards them. Your friends are going to look for you, I informed Bella. You better stop them before they run into our other acquaintances tonight. She shuddered in disgust at the thought of the 4 men. Jess, Angela, she called. They immediately turned and rushed towards her, their eyes lit up with relief. When they saw me standing next to Bella, her hands still comfortably ensconced in mine, their expressions changed. Angela was happy, thinking about how content Bella looked now that I was there. Jessica's thoughts were clouded with jealousy, her mind suspicious as she wondered whether Bella had planned to ditch them and meet me here. I inwardly rolled my eyes at her thoughts. Where were you? Angela asked. We were so worried. Bella looked sheepish. Sorry, I just ran into Edward and we got talking and lost track of time, she lied smoothly. I took that as my cue to jump in. Would you mind if I joined you for dinner? I asked to be polite, knowing they'd already eaten. Actually, we already ate while we were waiting. Angela apologized. I smiled. That's fine. I'd be happy to take Bella home myself after we've eaten. We don't want to hold you up, I offered. They looked to Bella for confirmation, and when she gave them a small nod, they quickly agreed, saying goodbye before hopping in their car and driving off. I smiled once they were gone, happy with my good fortune in keeping Bella to myself for a little longer. We walked into the restaurant, and I managed to get the waitress to sit us in a private area. Knowing Bella was likely to have some questions as to why I had been in Port Angeles and how I happened to show up when she got into trouble. Once Bella's dinner order was taken and her drink had arrived, I watched warily as she took a small sip, waiting for her to ask a question that I would probably have to lie about. She shocked me with her first question, though. "So what's the range of your mind reading?" she asked, as if it was the most natural thing in the world to be discussing. I gaped at her. How did she know about that? "What makes you think I can read minds?" I asked guardedly. She rolled her eyes at me. "Please, Edward." She held up her hand and started ticking things off on her fingers. "You knew which restaurant I was going to without me telling you. You knew where to find me this afternoon. You always seem to know what everyone around you is thinking, and sometimes you even react to something before a person had done it." Was I really that obvious? "But," she continued, "you don't seem to be able to read my mind, so there must be a few exceptions to your talent," she mused. "Only one," I muttered, an unintentional note of petulance in my tone. She smiled triumphantly at me, and I realized that I had accidentally confirmed her theory. The waitress arrived then, bringing Bella's plate of mushroom ravioli. Bella thanked her and dug in. Once the waitress was out of sight, Bella turned back to me. "So you were stalking me?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with humor. "Yes," I admitted, "and my range is around 10 miles, I guess." "Well, thank you for trying to save me again, but as you saw, I am quite capable of taking care of myself." "I noticed," I said dryly, "you seem to know a lot about martial arts." I observed, remembering the combination she had thrown at her attackers. She grinned and nodded. "I've been studying martial arts since I was 4. She admitted, "I could probably take on you, Emmett and Jasper, all at once and win," she remarked. I laughed at her incredulously. There was no way she could win against even one of us, not with our superior strength and speed. Bella turned back to her food. I sat there and watched her eat, stunned by the fact that she didn't seem the least fazed by my gift, or that I had admitted to stalking her. I was somewhat relieved, though, that she hadn't seemed to cotton on to the fact that the reason I had such a gift was because I wasn't human. She finished her food quickly, and I paid the bill, leading her out of the restaurant and back to the car. We started the drive back to Forks quietly, me driving slower than usual to prolong our time together. My curiosity soon got the better of me. "Why don't you seem surprised by the fact that I can read minds?" I asked. She looked over at me calmly. "It's fairly common for vampires to have gifts," she remarked casually, watching for my reaction. I nearly swerved the car off the road, but managed to keep my hands from moving. "You know what I am?" I whispered in shock. She sighed. "You and your family aren't the first vampires I've met, Edward." She said softly, "When I was 4, I met 3 vampires in Europe. I was lost, and I watched them drain 3 men, but afterwards they were full and they didn't think I'd make much of a snack, so they let me live. They even helped me find my mother again and told me a little about vampires. I guess they knew nobody would ever believe a 4-year-old story about supernatural beings that sparkled in the sun and never slept." She remarked dryly. My hands clenched as I realized just how much she knew about us. "In any case, as you can tell, I'm not scared of you or your family, and judging from the color of your eyes and the fact that there haven't been any suspicious deaths in this area, I'm pretty sure your family doesn't have a traditional diet. Not to mention, the Twilight legends about the cold ones mention that your family only drink from animals." I was astounded by her knowledge and extremely surprised that human-drinking vampires would let her live. I was also a little annoyed that the Quaaludes had turned out Treaty into a legend, which the younger generation didn't believe. "How can you not be afraid when you know what we're capable of?" I asked incredulously. "You've seen vampires kill humans with your own eyes, and yet you're completely calm sitting next to me." I was seriously starting to question her mental health. She shrugged. "You won't hurt me, Edward, and neither will your family." She said it with such confidence that it made me mad. "You don't know that," I growled. "We are so much stronger than you. Bella, we may not intentionally hurt you, but being near us is dangerous. Emmett could accidentally hug you too hard and crush you, or your scent could just overwhelm one of us," I explained, frustrated that she didn't see how dangerous it was for her to be around us, and yet some part of me was happy that she wanted to be near us. "You won't hurt me," she repeated, her voice still completely sure. "If you did, you would have already done it." I sighed, realizing that with Bella's stubbornness, I wasn't going to win this argument tonight. "So you really don't care that I'm a monster?" I asked as we passed the sign welcoming people to Forks and headed to her house. It was Bella's turn to look mad. "You're not a monster, Edward. Don't ever say that." Her tone was full of anger. Then she sighed and calmed down. "I need you to understand something, Edward," she started, and I looked at her curiously as I parked the car at her house. I don't care what you are. I probably wouldn't care even if you did hunt humans. She took a deep breath. I love you, she admitted softly. I was stunned, my body tingling with sensation as I reveled in her words, for once pushing my brooding and guilty thoughts about how unworthy of Bella I was aside. I lived in the moment, deliriously happy that this beautiful creature beside me loved me. I got out and went around the car, opening the door and helping Bella out, pulling her softly into a hug. I love you too, my beautiful Bella, I whispered softly, looking down at her luminescent face, her eyes shining brightly with happiness at my admission. I leaned down cautiously, making sure the burn in my throat was in check, as I softly placed my lips on Bella's. As I softly kissed her, intending on keeping it light, Bella's arms suddenly wound tightly around my neck, and her body pressed up against mine as she opened her mouth and sighed into mine, pressing her lips tighter against mine. Our lips moved together, and my whole body felt warm for the first time in nearly a century. All too soon, we were forced to stop as Bella needed to breath, and I needed to keep my vampiric urges to drain her blood at bay. I looked down at her and smiled, kissing her softly on the forehead. I'll see you tomorrow, Bella, I said softly, releasing her from my grip and getting back in the car. As I drove away, I watched her, smiling after me as she made her way to the porch. As much as I hated leaving her, I was content, reveling in the feelings that 3 words from her and a kiss had brought out in me. I couldn't wait to hear her sleep talking tonight.